we're back. Part 2 of Tide and Tempest. Should probably rewind. Hi everybody, I'm Lindsey Pogue. I am the author of Tide and Tempest. And this is part 2 of that story. There is part 1, so if you have not listened to it yet, go ahead and look in the description below. There is a link to part 1. There are also 3 other installments in the series that if they are not already live, they will be, so be sure to listen to those as well. So, without further ado, this is part 2 of Tide and Tempest. Samara's story is just getting started. It's just starting to get crazy, and I cannot wait for you to see what comes next. I will see you on the other side.
Chapter 16. Mending my gloves is a mundane task on any evening. Doing it beside my father, in front of the fire with a belly full of the rabbit stew that he made, however, is far less routine. After 2 days, the storm winds still howl into the night. Water plinks into the pail by my loft, and the cottage shudders every so often, making it easier than I'd expected to find an amicable silence between the 4 of us. As the water plinks over and over, I grit my teeth, silently cursing myself for not clearing the moss from the roof and fixing the slats when I had the chance. But like many other tasks, it slipped my mind because of my father's arrival. Issa tends to the wound on Raph's side, careful as she wipes what little dried blood seeped through since last night's restitching. He must feel my gaze, scrutinizing his mother's work, because Raph's eyes flick to mine with an "Are you satisfied now?" glint in them. Across the table from me, my father takes a sip of his ale as he pores over a ledger, focused solely on the pages. An additional candle flickers between us to light our tasks, and I notice his notebook is bound by reed strings and creased from constant use. Though I haven't heard my father grumble about remaining in Ebonpeak longer than expected, I imagine his men were none too happy to learn it, and his mind is clearly busy as he draws a line through multiple items with a coal stick. "Raph," he says absently. He scours the page before going to the next. "I don't see." "I put it at the end of our inventory," Raph says, anticipating him. "With the other perishables? Since we haven't had time to cure anything we've caught outside that city, I figured we should eat it first." My father hums in agreement. "And the wine? Did we really go through 3 casks at the feast?" "From what I can remember," Raph mutters, and my father almost smiles at that. My eyes dart between them as I realize how easily they coexist. Even if their circumstance is strange, the way my father relies on Raph, and Raph respects him in return, it's obvious. Even Issa watches them closely as she wraps fresh cloth around Raph's torso. The longer I study the richly colored dyes of their clothes, and the jewels and stones that adorn their accessories, the more my mind drifts to what life might look like in the southern lands, far, far away from this dreary life. And the more I wonder why my father wishes I'll return with him, since he's barely looked at me since arriving. It's in his silence that I feel his discomfort in this place, around me, most keenly. "What will you do, now that you must stay?" I ask. My voice is small above the thunderstorm, but it practically rings in our lack of conversation. My father adjusts his spectacles, but continues to scour the page in front of him. "Whatever we must," he says. "There are 15 extra mouths to feed in Ebonpeak now, so when the weather lets us, we will hunt, and as always, I'm sure there will be storm damage to tend to." He continues. He combs his fingers through his beard. "And Gil mentioned Link's nuptials are in a few weeks' time, and we will need a feast, so we'll see that it's done." He takes another gulp of his ale. Raph leans his head back against the chair and closes his eyes as his mother tugs his tunic down to cover him. "There's the return trip to think about as well," my father adds. This time his eyes flash quickly to me. "If you were all to come to Oaxaca with us, we'd need to plan accordingly." Issa watches us from the corner of her eye as she spools the loose thread from her sewing kit. I can feel her attention on me. It's cold, despite the heat of the fire. "Well," I start, tugging one of Fergus's tail hairs through the finger of my glove. "If the waters are safer now because of your men, as you say they are, then there's no reason for us to leave." My father's brow twitches, and what would have once been a flare of warning in his eyes looks more like concern before he looks away. Perhaps, he says, but there's the lightning you must worry about. Just like you have the floods, I add, and mosquitoes. I look at Raph. The heavy lids of his eyes are pried slightly open, and he's watching me. My father clears his throat, and his bushy eyebrow lifts in question as he looks at Raph. I thought we were trying to convince Samara to return with us, not scare her away. Issa reorganizes her mending kit, and Raph leans his elbows on the table. And I, he counters with a goading gleam in his eyes, thought she was a great fighter. I didn't realize she would scare so easily. Who said I was scared? Aren't you? Raph volleys back. I glared at him. No, distrust and fear are not the same. I am not foolish enough to leave everything I know, everything we've all worked for, simply because a ship of raiders showed up, claiming to have good intentions. He and I stare at one another, unblinking, until my father clears his throat again, dragging my gaze back to him. This time, my father looks directly at me, his expression somber. How bad has it gotten, Samara? Truly. Gil says storm season is longer, but if that is true, your time to prepare has grown even shorter. I avert my gaze to the fire. I don't know what my father wishes to hear. That life is arduous and unpredictable, that the pressure to gather and secure supplies increases every season. This year, we barely made it back from the scorched forest before the first storm arrived. Even now, most of the wood still needs to be cut or peeled or stacked. And food, he prompts, his voice grave and reminiscent of the father I remember. I hear his guarded concern, his protectiveness. When I glance at Issa and Raph, they are watching me, both of their gazes glimmering with curiosity in the firelight. Having them around is unsettling enough, but divulging our weaknesses to these people goes against every ingrained need I have to keep my people safe. If there was more time to tend to it, there would be no lack of food, I tell him. And if the fields were given more time to dry. I add, I don't want to list Ebonpeak's shortcomings because I don't want to give my father additional reasons to convince me to return with him. But I won't lie either. We have fresh water and plenty to hunt and forage. We have the sea we can thank for endless supplies of fish and mussels, seal and otter. But the time in which we have to stock up on what we need, to go to the scorched forest for dry wood and fish the open waters, grows shorter each year. For a moment, it irks me that my father has to ask me any of this at all. He should have been here to help. But knowing my frustration is anything but helpful, I refocus on the final stitches of my mending. Tomorrow, we'll divide the men into teams, Issa offers, looking at my father. Andrik is a woodsman like you, and Hector is a great builder back home. They can work with Abraham while Raph organizes the others for a hunt. It's already been discussed, Mother, Raph says, just as my father sighs and says, only if the storm lets up. My father glances at her. And yes, Raph and I have already planned it out. No need to worry yourself. Though Raph and my father don't seem to notice, Issa's lips purse. We'll discuss it more tomorrow, once we know the weather conditions. My father placates and closes his ledger. I'm not sure if it's because she's been politely dismissed or because Raph can clearly stand my father more than his mother most of the time, but her eyes narrow ever so slightly. As Raph plops a piece of bread into his mouth from the platter on the table, Issa scoots the bench out from under her. Raph lurches forward, his elbow slipping from the tabletop in her abrupt departure. He flashes his mother a hard look. It's been a long few days, she says with an exhale. We should all get rest. She collects her mending kit and returns it to a drawstring bag hanging from a hook on the wall. Good night. Raph tears a larger piece of bread, his eyes fixed on the crumbs he presses on the table with his fingertip. Good night, Mother. He mutters around his food. He doesn't spare Issa another glance. And though I'm not sure what's going on between them, it doesn't go unnoticed by me or my father. Without another word, Issa gathers her crimson skirt and climbs a ladder to their loft. "I'll retire as well," my father says, putting his ledger back in one of the chests. He nods between Raph and me. "Good night." I barely hear their harsh whispers in the loft with the wind howling outside, but I clear my throat, anxious to drown them out completely. "My father needed a crew to get here," I say, unable to resist asking at least one of the surmounting questions kicking around in my head. "So I can imagine why you've made the journey to Ebonpeak. But your mother—" I tie off the mended seam in my glove and look at Raph. Whatever her reason, she seems to regret it now. He stares into the fire, an exhausted, glassy sheen to his eyes. "My mother is a complicated woman," he says, and I blink a few times, waiting for him to continue. When he doesn't, I decide I don't have the energy for riddles and vague replies, so I don't press him. I'm not sure it matters why they accompanied my father, because we're all stuck here together regardless. "Well then," I say, rising to my feet, "as riveting as this has been, I'm going to sleep." Raph stares into the fire as though he doesn't even hear me. I walk to my loft, toss my gloves into the trunk under my ladder, and climb to the top. The loft is cooler, so far from the fire, and the wind is ravenous outside, but it's almost comforting in a way, a familiar lull I hope will help me sleep. My mind wanders as I unbuckle my vest. The last time I slept under the same roof as my father, it was in our home, and he was in his loft with my mother. And there was no surly raider with glossy black curls falling into his eyes, brooding at our dinner table. Hair unbraided, and wearing nothing more than a tunic, I curl into my blankets and peer over the ledge down at Raph's back. It's easy enough to ignore the cooing pheasants in their alcove below, and the slow and steady plink of water in the pail as I watch the way Raph's shoulders rise and fall with each breath. The flames in the hearth seem to flicker to the call of the wind thrashing outside, and finally, the foreign scene becomes a blur as the warmth of my bed consumes me, and my eyes grow so heavy I can no longer dwell on the world around me. Chapter 17. When I wake, it's to the gloomy morning filtering through the window into my eyes, and as I register the silence of the cottage, I stir fully awake. Only vaguely do I remember hearing the door opening and closing in the wee hours of the morning, but now I don't even hear the plink, plink, plink in the bucket anymore. Pulling myself to the ledge of the loft, I peer below. There is no morning fire, the water pail is gone, and it appears I'm alone. I don't know how I could have slept through the morning commotion, but I'm relieved I did. Yawning, I stretch on my pallet. Aside from my lingering body aches from my hurried return from the city, I feel more rested than I've felt in days. But my leisurely lolling doesn't last long as the list of chores I have to tend to compounds, and fixing the roof before the next storm is at the top of it. I dress and quickly braid my hair. As I'm finishing, I catch the swish of heavy skirts, and then the door opens. Issa steps into the cottage with a sack in her arms. "You're awake. Good." She sounds anything but relieved, though. "I need to make bread for this afternoon." "What's happening this afternoon?" I ask as I climb down the ladder, though I'm slightly terrified of the answer. "Abra," Issa clears her throat. "Your father and Andrik are meeting with some of the villagers to discuss the return voyage home," she says. Her jade ring flashes in the sunlight as she dons the apron she was working on the other night. I can't help but notice she knows her way around the kitchen too, which surprises me. I would think a woman of her standing would have people to make bread and aprons for her, not do it herself. In my silence, Issa's eyes flick to me, catching me staring. Her hand stills on the burlap sack of grain traded from Lonemore, and her gaze sharpens, as if she's waiting for me to finish examining her. My cheeks flush, but not because I've been caught. The perturbed expression pinching her features vanishes as she tilts her head, her eyes trailing the length of my scars inch by inch. Remembering herself, her gaze meets mine, and she straightens. "Your father told me what happened when he left," she says. and I can't help but feel a strange sense of betrayal that he would talk to her about something that still feels so raw and personal. I don't blame you for being angry with him. I would hate him if I were you too. There's a slight edge in the way she says hate that makes me feel uncomfortable. And I would hate him for what he did to your husband as well, I counter. Issa doesn't flinch. Her eyebrow doesn't arch. In fact, she seems completely unaffected by my mentioning her murdered husband. Even if there was no love lost, as my father claims, it surprises me. Without missing a beat, Issa turns to the bowls and stirring sticks on the shelf as if she belongs in this place, in my home. It's difficult to fault a man like your father for his actions after losing so much, Issa says over her shoulder. You're referring to my mother, I whisper, suddenly sick as it dawns on me all over again that it's not only the same ship and some of Gutierrez's men who have returned to Ebonpeak, but his family who have come to my home. Issa hums in agreement. Yes, your mother, especially since he's shown my son mercy when my husband did no such thing. She scoops a few spoonfuls of flour into a bowl, then reaches behind her for the basket of eggs. Do you cook, Samara? She asks. Or do you only mend, swing your axe blade, and fight? I'm not particularly good at cooking, no, I admit, never having felt inadequate with so much to fill the day with, until now. Food is fuel, I tell her, nothing more. Of course. Issa begins stirring. You'd rather go on adventures to the sunken city and risk your life to fight men twice your size. Raiders, you call us, yes? Obviously, she's referring to Raph, and I resent her condescending tone. I didn't know who he was, I remind her. Issa's attention darts to me, her gaze searing under the fan of her lashes. And that would have mattered? She sounds as if she wants to laugh. Not with mirth, but with incredulity, and my spine straightens. No, I confess. Probably not. My defenses rise, annoyed that she thinks she knows me at all. When you are born and bred with fear in your heart, survival is all you know, and there is little that would stop a person from protecting themselves and those they care about. Even if it means your life, she huffs, glancing at my scars again. You are either foolish and rash, or very brave. Her judgmental tone only angers me more. And you know nothing about our lives here, I remind her. Issa leans forward, bracing her flour-covered palms on the table as she stares into my eyes. Her irises are so brown, they appear almost black, like Raph's. Take care, Samara. We have traveled a very long way to find you. I would hate for... A throat clears from the doorway, and I half turn to find Raph standing there, his expression impassive and fixed on his mother. Yes, she says with a dull edge to her voice. Raph's gaze shifts to me. I wanted to make sure you were awake. The skeptical look in his eyes doesn't escape me, and I tally yet another question that begs to be asked. What tension is pulled so taut between mother and son I can feel it fraying? I don't get a chance when my father strolls in behind Raph, stopping beside Issa as he watches her kneading dough. For this afternoon? He asks. She offers him a nod and small smile, but it's cagey at best. I'm making it just the way you like. There's a lilt of tenderness in her tone I haven't heard before, and even if I know they sleep in the same bed, there's something about that brief, unguarded moment that raises my hackles even more. As if to rub salt on a gaping wound, my father kisses Issa's temple, and bile rises in my throat. How has this hard-edged, bitter woman weaseled her way into my father's life? She is so different from my mother. It's offensive. Raph turns to leave, and I'm about to escape behind him. Samara, my father says with a quick glance in my direction. Gil said your leek and mushroom soup is the best he's had. I blink at him. Of course, Gil told him the one thing I enjoy cooking. After a moment, my father clears his throat. Will you make some for tonight's gathering? Link, Andrik, and a few others will be here to discuss the return home. Home. A relative term, but I ignore it and search frantically for an excuse to remain absent for the afternoon. But my list of chores suddenly flees my brain, and with their eyes on me, I can't seem to say no. I don't have any mushrooms for a soup, I tell them. My father's cheek twitches and the corners of his eyes crinkle, as if he's won a minor victory. That's easy enough to remedy. He looks at Issa. Perhaps you two can forage. I'll take care of it, I blurt. Spending more alone time with Issa is the last thing I want to do today. Her brow quirks slightly, her unnerving gaze pinned on me as usual. Without further delay, I snatch one of the baskets hanging over the wash basin and hasten to the door. Cooking for a dinner party? I'm not sure how that happened, but I don't dwell on it as I step outside, the fresh breeze cool against my skin. I let the salty air fill my lungs, then I exhale the awkwardness of the last few minutes. Allowing my nerves to settle a moment, I crack my neck and peer around. The day is drab, and smoke billows from chimneys throughout the village. Save for my father and Issa inside the cottage, it feels like any other day. Hammering echoes from the smithy, chattering emanates from deeper in the village. Some of the townspeople cling to ladders as they repair the storm damage to their homes during the break in the weather. I think about my own roof in need of mending and curse. Foraging for mushrooms? A thwack ricochets above me, and I spin around to find Raph and Hector on the roof. What are you doing? I bark, taking a step closer. A ladder is braced against the eave. Fixing the hole in the roof? Raph says, removing a wooden slat from a small stack beside him. You don't have to. Trust me, I do. I didn't get a lick of sleep last night. He spares Hector a rueful glance, then hammers the slat into place. He ignores the twinge I know he must feel in his side still. I was going to do that as soon as I had a moment. I tell him, it's not your house, you don't have to fix it. It's fine, Samara. Hector and I are more than capable. Hector looks at me, his face inscrutable. Besides, Raph continues, it seems you're busy. He glances at the basket in my hand and flashes me a goading smile. So go on now, we can handle it. I mutter another curse, unable to stand his smug expression a second longer, and trudge through the mud, wishing today was a sparring day, so I might have an excuse for punching something. Chapter 18. All morning I scour the hills beneath the wild oaks looking for chanterelles. The earth is soggy under my boots, and the air holds a familiar mugginess that only comes with the storm season. But my mind doesn't linger on the roiling, dark clouds above or the impending storm. Instead, I think about my mother. I only make the mushroom soup because she taught me the recipe, because it was her favorite meal. Has my father forgotten that? Making it for Raph and Issa feels like a cruel joke. Crouching down, I pick a few black chanterelles from beneath a rotted log and drop them into the basket. It's nearly full, and just as I'm resigned to return to the cottage to begin the soup, the creak of wagon wheels meets my ears. Eric makes his way down the path, but instead of a horse or a donkey, he pulls the cart himself. His rolled-up sleeves expose his straining muscles, and his brow is furrowed in contemplation and beading with sweat. No matter what caustic thoughts brew when I see him, there is no denying that each brawny inch of Eric has been hard-earned. He and his father have no horse, no Fergus. They have no steer and no chickens. They have nothing but their ramshackle cottage, patched back together after Desolation Day, and the tanning shack and storage for the pelts in which they earn their living. I've always supposed that's the way they liked it, simple, and just the two of them. Only now, such assumptions give me pause. Eric's father was never the same after Desolation Day. I'm not sure he cares much about anything other than ale anymore. Eric stops halfway past me, oblivious to me crouched by the trees. Lowering the cart, he straightens, closes his eyes, and rolls his shoulders. Sacks of grain and baskets of citrus fruit from Lone Moor are stacked inside the handcart. At a day's journey away, he must have gone to trade his hides and furs for supplies before the storm started, and been stuck there the past 2 days. Eric rubs the back of his shorn head with a heavy exhale. There's something so human about him when he's not glaring daggers at me, but my voyeurism is short-lived. The moment Eric sees me, I clear my throat and rise to my feet. I brace myself for a sharp-tongued remark, but an insult never comes. Instead, he wipes the sweat from his forehead, turns for a grape in one of the baskets, twists the stem from it, and pops it in his mouth. "You risk such a long journey between storms?" I say when the awkward silence between us stretches too long. Glancing up at the churning clouds above us, I know it's only a matter of time before the sky opens again. "As if I have a choice," Eric says. His jaw works beneath the tawny, unshaven scruff of his face as he squishes the grape between his teeth. "Some of us still have to work and carry on despite your father's return." There's the dripping animosity I've come to rely on. I take a few steps toward him. "By all means, then," I say, gesturing toward the village. "Don't let me keep you. I should get back to my flower picking anyway," I say tartly. Eric plops another grape into his mouth, eyeing my basket of mushrooms as he chews, loudly. The hard set of his expression would be intimidating if he wasn't so predictable. "Fine, I'll go," I say. My basket is full anyway. I stalk past him, preferring that I was behind Eric rather than him behind me, but I don't let that slow me down. Eric and I don't do awkward silence. We fight and curse, sometimes mutter under our breath, then go our separate ways. So anything is better than the awkwardness. Ground crunches under my boots. The cart squeaks a ways behind me as Eric follows. And a few moments later, the watchtowers along the village wall peek over the hill. Just when I think I've escaped the onslaught of the next storm, blinding light flashes around me. Electricity hums over my skin, and the world rumbles in answer under my feet. I'm a sitting duck out here, exposed in the open, rolling hills. Heart racing, I decide to make a run for the village as a strong hand wraps around my bicep. Eric tugs me toward the cart as another bolt of lightning scorches the sky. I stumble and drop my basket, but it all happens so quickly I can't find it in me to care as I'm pulled under the cart. Lying on my stomach, shoulder to shoulder with Eric, our panting breaths echo around us as our chests heave. More lightning etches the sky. I feel the heat of it, the way the air surges as it touches down somewhere. I've seen enough people struck by lightning to know I never want to risk it and take the gamble I'll come out alive. Eric's wild brown eyes meet mine as we both catch our breath, and when the situation settles in fully, I brace my forehead on the damp earth and groan. "Ugh, this is not happening." Eric resituates himself beside me. "It's not ideal for me either, but feel free to brave the storm if you want." The sky flashes in warning, and the hair standing up on my neck is all the caution I need to stay put. Resting my cheek on the ground, I stare at my mushrooms scattered in the mud a few paces away. I realize that being stuck under the cart means I don't have to cook for Issa and my father anymore. "I got out of that at least," I mutter. Eric grumbles as he tries to roll onto his back. His broad shoulders make it nearly impossible for him to turn around, but after a few grunts and shimmies, he's finally on his back. He heaves a sigh, drowned out by the booming thunder. I turn onto my back too, staring up at the wood-slatted bottom of the cart. The ground beneath us continues to tremble with each flash of light, and I close my eyes to inhale a steadying breath. My thoughts shift to Raph as I consider him on the roof. I hope he was able to fix the leak in time. Though it's not raining yet, that doesn't mean it isn't coming. I feel a small appreciation toward him for that, but I don't let the gratitude swell too great. If it weren't for him being here, I'd be working on the roof and not out here collecting mushrooms and stuck under a cart with Eric. Remembering his presence, I open my eyes to find Eric staring at my scarred face. Though my scars aren't pretty, I know it's how they got there that still confounds people. Some of them wonder if I'm crazy at times, and occasionally, I feel like they might be right. I fist my hands, silently chiding myself that I care at all. "Get a good look," I grind out. Everyone else who stares at me has the decency to glance away when they realize I notice. But not Eric. He openly gawks at me, and I hate that I can guess the colorful insults he refrains from saying out loud these days. I should be grateful for his silence, I guess. "Why did you do it?" he asks. Instead of acidity in his voice, there's a disquiet I don't expect. And unwanted warmth curls through me. I was bored. I deadpan. Eric doesn't say anything, but I can still feel his gaze on me. Why is it my own father will barely look at me, but Eric, my nemesis in so many ways, won't look away? This time I turn my head to glare at him. "What?" I bark. "What are you staring at? You haven't got a good enough look the past 6 years? I know I'm hideous to you, okay? Find something else to fixate on." My fingernails bite into my palms, and I want to pound my fist into his stomach to give him something else to think about for a while. But my conscience instantly chides me for being so hateful, because even if Eric is cruel in many ways, he did just help me, and I don't think his question was meant to be unkind. He finally faces forward, staring at the bottom of the cart as I do, and we say nothing more. The world is a squall around us, wind and chaos and light. I feel my body prick with heat the longer we lay next to one another without uttering a word. But I have nothing to say, and clearly neither does he. I count my lucky stars, few of them that there are. There's no rain yet, or we'd be soaked on top of everything else. I'm not sure how much time passes before my eyes grow tired, and I welcome a temporary respite of sleep, knowing the time will pass more quickly if I'm able to fade away for a while. "Will you leave with him?" Eric asks, his voice a murmur in my ear, and rough from disuse. My eyes flit open as the world flashes brighter, my vision adjusting again. "Of course not," I say easily. Eric blinks up at the cracked wood. "Why not?" "Because." He looks at me, waiting for an actual response. I don't trust them, I admit, though I'm interested to know where Eric's curiosity stems from. Why? Would you go back with him? The bronze flecks in Eric's eyes flicker in the flashing storm. "No," he finally says, "but he is your father, and you hate him so much you wouldn't leave." My father can't come back after tearing out my heart and expect me to trust him. I explain. He's a raider. He left me behind, and I have Link and Gil now. "Even if you have to watch Link with Violet?" My gaze shoots to Eric. I trust Link with my life, and know he would never betray our past to someone like Eric. "It's obvious," he mutters, and I wonder what exactly Eric has observed over the years. As possibilities from the past resurface, the inches between Eric and me stir with uncomfortable silence once more. I squeeze my eyes shut. Each breath seems to drag on, and I imagine Link with Violet, helping her father and mother this very moment. Even if it's hard to be around them, it's better than the alternative. Life away from here, surrounded by people who don't know me, isn't an option. Issa and Raph are strangers to me, I hear myself say. So is my father. I feel Eric's gaze again, but I ignore it. I'm too tired to care what he's thinking. Just when I think we've fallen into a quiet truth again, he speaks. "I thought you might want to escape this place, is all." His voice is a low rumble in the absence of thunder, and it holds a hopeful lilt that hurts, even though I shouldn't be surprised he wants me to leave, and I try to ignore it. "You could go somewhere you don't have to worry about storms and raiders, not if you're one of them." "I will never be one of them," I whisper. "After what they did to my mother, to yours." I shake my head. How could you even think that? Surely no matter how much he dislikes me, he wouldn't think that little of me. Eric scratches his stubbled jaw, and the scent of him fills my nose. leather and earth, which is surprisingly pleasant. It's enticing, though, isn't it? He picks at the imperfections in the wood above his head. Not having to worry if you'll be struck by lightning while you're picking mushrooms, and to be able to fish all year long instead of between shortening winters. Your father's offering you what every single one of us wants, and you won't take it because you're mad at him. Do you want me gone so badly? I say, but I already know the answer. Oh, why do you hate me so much, Eric? It's been years since I asked him last, though I'm not sure why I ask again, expecting a real answer. To my surprise, Eric's brow crinkles, and he looks almost saddened. I don't hate you. It takes me a moment to process his words, and an unexpected relief fills my chest. Suddenly, I can't tear my eyes off of him, and every inch of me is suspended anxiously in wait. His Adam's apple moves down the column of his throat with a hard swallow. I don't know if Eric is contemplating what to say, or if his quietness is his refusal to continue, but I can barely stand it. I've never wanted to know what thoughts churn behind his eyes so badly, and I'm about to demand he finally put me out of my misery so we can be done with it, when muffled voices reach our ears. Eric and I crane our necks toward the village as Issa and Raph walk toward us. Her expression is displeased as she and her son have a heated discussion. It's only then I realize it's been a while since the last lightning flash, and the storm seems to have moved on. I'm about to roll out from under the wagon when Eric's fingers wrap around my arm, holding me in place. I glare at him, only to find he's watching Issa and Raph, listening as they draw closer. Las tormentas, Raph says, shaking his head. Storms. I've heard them talking about them before. There is little we can do. No, I refuse to believe that, Issa hisses back. You are a man of your word, Raphael. No retrocedas ahora. They are counting on you. Mother. They stop, finally noticing the cart. Since we've been spotted, I roll out from under it. Samara, Issa breathes, and after a furtive glance between Eric and me, they continue closer. I'm not sure if it's her conversation while trudging up the hill with Raph that's got her sounding so winded, or her shock in finding us. I look at Eric, and I see an unmistakable trepidation in his eyes, which surprises me. We were coming to look for you, Raph says, glancing from me to Eric. Their gazes fix on one another, and they both look as if they are not only sizing each other up, but warning each other away at the same time. I frown. We should return, Issa says, crouching down to collect my dropped mushrooms, before another storm arrives. Raph tears his gaze from Eric and comes over to help, but I don't need them fussing over my mushrooms or me. In fact, that they would come looking for me at all is odd enough. I wonder if Eric thinks the same, but when I glance over my shoulder at him, he doesn't spare me another look. Lifting his cart, he continues pulling it toward the village. I watch him, dejected. Eric helps me, then insults me, and yet there was unnerving sincerity in his voice too. Now he can't get away fast enough? I ignore whatever platitudes Issa and Raph are uttering as I stare at the imprints of Eric's and my bodies in the damp earth. I've known Eric all my life, and yet, only now, after all this time, do I have a nagging need to understand him better. Chapter 19. My brow beads with sweat as I stir the stew one last time in the hearth. There's a reason I rarely cook for anyone but Gil and me. I'm horrible at it. Yes, I can chop leeks and garlic and mushrooms well enough, but with 6 hungry people sitting around the table, bellies rumbling as they wait for food, I find I can't even recall if I've added all of the spices or not. It's too late to worry about it now, and everyone, but Cynthia, has had enough ale that I'm not overly worried about their taste buds. She sips at her mug, but is too lost in Gil and my father's banter to overdrink. I glance at Raph, rocking back on one leg of his chair at the end of the table. He braces his foot on the center post of the cottage as he scrapes beneath his fingernails with the tip of his knife, looking bored. Though he appears every part the raider, from buckled boot to scabbard blades and his sun-bleached leather vest, his devil-may-care attitude and handsome face make him far less terrifying than I initially thought, especially when he smiles about something my father says, looking almost boyish. Issa uncovers her freshly baked loaf of bread from the windowsill, and I ladle the first bowl halfway and slide it down the table. I had to get my affairs in order, and was waiting for the right time to return. My father explains. Gil, Andrik, and Raph know this story, so the explanation must be for Rory and Link's benefit. It was with Issa's encouragement that I decided it was finally time to make the journey, though I was surprised when she decided to join me. He flashes her a contented look, and it seems our timing was a bit off. He jests. I set another bowl of soup in front of Andrik to pass down the table. It sloshes over the brim as Rory slams his fist down with a hearty laugh. I knew it was only a matter of time before you'd come back. Everyone said you were dead, but I knew. He waggles his finger at my father before sliding the bowl down to Cynthia. You're too much of a brute to die, even if you wished for it. I remember Gil, Rory, Andrik, and my father sitting around the table like this years ago, even if Rory was never quite so joyful, nor so drunk. Everything that happened before my father left has been a topic he's danced around since his return, and I'm glad of it. I don't wish to hear about the past, not when trying to reconcile it with the present makes me sad and resentful. So tell me, old friend. My father starts. He tips his mug at Rory. How is tanning and pelting these days? Have the seasons changed so much the sea lions no longer migrate here? I haven't heard any since my return. Rory shrugs, wiping his mouth with a disgruntled huff. The changing tides take them farther down the coast each year, but Eric knows when the timing is right. He takes a gulp of his ale. It foams on his tawny mustache, and he licks his lips. Some years have been harder than others, I reckon, but we bring in enough to tide over the village during the summer months, and enough to trade when we need. That boy of mine sees to it. He's probably working right now. Rory's glassy eyes shadow as he ruminates. Eric keeps the meat and hides coming in as best he can. I set another 2 bowls on the table as Issa places sliced bread in the center. I can't say much for you, old friend. My father jokes in a low rumble, but it seems you've done something right by that son of yours. My father slides a bowl in front of him, cupping it with his large hands as he glances around the table. Hopefully our efforts at sea have provided the villages with one less thing to worry about, though I can't say it does much for your current predicament. What will you do in 5 years, or 10, when there is no winter break from the storms at all? It's a matter we've been discussing. Gil adds, taking a sip from his bowl. With everyone eating, I ladle a bowl for Issa and myself. I'm about to put the spoon back into the pot when there's a knock on the door. The cottage quiets, and I walk over to crack the door open. Eric. Surprised, I straighten and open it wider. He clears his throat as his gaze shifts from me into the cottage. In all the years I've known Eric, he's never looked so out of place as he does standing in my doorway, his large frame nearly filling it. I'm here to collect my father, he says quietly, and after seeing him with Rory in the alehouse, I can understand why he's come to take him home already. There's my boy, Rory sings. Eric's clothes are dirty everywhere save where his leather apron covered him. He looks exhausted, his eyes shadowed and red-rimmed, and I wonder when he last sat down to rest. You ready, Pop? Strange as it feels, I wave Eric inside. Come, sit, eat something. I can't guarantee it's any good, but it's warm. Eric's brow furrows, his eyes shift over me as if he's worried it's a trap. and though he hesitates, he seems resigned as he eyes his father at the end of the table, slurping up his dinner. Time to collect me, Rory chuckles, but irritation prickles over me. I don't find it the slightest bit funny that this has been Eric's life for the past 6 years. Come on, I say, grabbing his arm. It's hard and flexes against my fingers, but he allows me to pull him inside. I'll get you a bowl. It's good to see you, son, my father says, rising to shake Eric's hand. Andrik comments on what a strapping man he's become and his obvious strength as Eric takes a seat by his father. There's barely room for the 6 people at our meager table, let alone Eric's large frame. But they make it work. Raph levels his watchful gaze on him, the tension from their silent but threatening exchange at the cart earlier settling in, though I think I might be the only one who notices. I walk a bowl of soup over to Eric, and the conversation from before continues around us. Thank you. Eric peers up at me, his brow knit with unease instead of his usual contempt. Sure, I say, and walk back to my bowl and seat at the fire. Uncertain weather is why we've postponed Link's wedding feast. We wanted to make sure the village had the supplies needed to last the storm season first, and we needed to make an extra trip to the city for... Yes, Issa says, speaking for the first time since everyone arrived, but I'm the only one who seems to hear her. Her eyes skirt to me as she sips from her spoon beside my father. Your confrontation with Raph. Raph glances up from his bowl and meets my gaze with far too much amusement. More lightning rods, my father muses, glancing at Gil as he dips a chunk of bread into his soup. Lone Moore lost 3 people last season, Gil tells him. And we've lost 7 since you left. Link adds, we need more metal to smelt. Well, rest assured, my father says, tearing a piece of bread between his teeth. We mean to contribute while we're here, assuming the weather holds. Raph will lead a team of men out to hunt tomorrow, while the rest of us help with village repairs. Building together once again, Rory says, like old times. He slurps down the last of his soup, and when he looks up, it drips from his mustache. It hasn't been the same here since you left, he adds more solemnly. Not without you or Olivia. Issa's spoon stills at her lips, and Rory looks at me, his brow furrowing for the first time tonight. You still look like her, even with that face of yours. My blood burns through me, and my cheeks fill with fire as everyone's eyes shift to me, everyone but my father's. Pop, Eric starts. No matter how hard you try, you'll always be like her, I think. Eric reaches for his father's arm. It's time to go. Come on, he urges. As Rory rises, he looks at my father. It must be strange for you, eh, Abraham? That's enough. Eric bites out, tugging him off the bench seat. Come on, old man, he commands, manhandling him toward the door. Everyone's attention shifts from Rory to me again, but it's Eric I can't pry my eyes away from. Now, he growls, low in his father's ear. Grabbing Rory by the shoulder with one hand, he flings the door open and shoves him outside with the other. I tell myself it's embarrassment that makes Eric work so quickly, but I can't help the fullness of my chest as my heart swells with gratitude. Eric flashes me a strange look over his shoulder, his eyes locking on mine as his eyebrows draw together. Then he latches the door shut behind him. Chapter 20. Lying in bed, wrapped in warm furs and ready for sleep, all I can think about is Eric. His shifting countenance. That look on his face before he left tonight. It was protective, like the way he held me to the shadows under the cart. And there was a sincerity in his eyes I've never seen. Eric has never looked at me with anything other than a dependable contempt, like I'm the manure stuck to his boot he can't seem to wipe away. Despite how often I've told myself that his snide remarks haven't affected me over the years, it's a lie. They linger and needle their way under my skin, roosting there with every regret and guilt-ridden memory. But more than once today, my heart warmed to him, just a little. Perhaps Eric's hatred has fizzled over the years, but there's never been solidarity between us, and I'm not quite sure what to think. Curiosity has me questioning what else I might find if I look deeper through the cracks in his stone demeanor. Shrouded in the darkness, I blink at the ceiling. The fire went out long ago, and my father's soft snores fill the cottage as it creaks in the wind. I imagine myself standing on the cliff, with the wind in my hair and the great expanse of the ocean stretched out before me. In the continual changing of the tides, the wind and the sea are the only constants in my existence at the moment, and I cling to the thought of them as I will my mind to rest. But as my eyes flit closed, the floorboards creak below. Light footsteps, the rustling of leather. Though the cottage is dark, I turn onto my shoulder and peer down into the shadows. I can barely make out Raph's form as he reaches for the door. The moment he opens it, the gray of night washes over him, illuminating his glossy black hair. Raph peers behind him, standing still as he listens for movement, then slips outside. The argument Eric and I overheard between Raph and Issa comes back to life, as does the apprehensive look on Eric's face. Whatever distrust Eric and I have only blares louder as Raph sneaks off in the cover of night. Unease chases away all remnants of sleep, and it takes no time at all to tug my pants on. I climb down from the loft, grab my boots and vest draped over my trunk, and head out the door, far more quietly than Raph. I haphazardly lace my boots once I'm outside, watching the night shadows for movement. There is nowhere to go up here other than a few villagers' homes, so I head down the path toward the longhouse where I know his raider friends are camped. I expect he's itching for a late-night game of dice, but I don't hear a ruckus inside when I get there. As I reach for the door, there's movement in my periphery, and my hand stills on the latch. Raph's shadowed form slips through the gate. It's no nightly jaunt to drink with the men then, and my apprehension flares back to life. Only then do I remember my axe is back at the cottage. In a rush of urgency, I reach for the pitchfork propped against the side of the baker's cottage, and I slip out the gate after Raph. I don't want to lose his trail, but I'm not going empty-handed either, uncertain what I might discover. I keep to the shadows as I search the cypress-lined path for more movement. When I see Raph disappear around the corner a few meters ahead, I stalk after him. He uses the trees for cover, then makes his way down the trail to the beach. I follow, careful of the loose rubble. The tanning shack and pelt storage are locked up, the boats at harbor roll with the waves, and La Condesa is anchored in the bay, cast in the pale light of the moon. What are you up to, Raph? When he disappears around the cliff face, I walk faster, confident the waves and wind will cover any noise I make. But as I walk toward the tide pools, the shoreline is swallowed by an inky darkness. I pass the rocky cove where Raph saw me bathing, and fleetingly, I wonder if he might be indulging in a midnight swim. Sidestepping the surf with barely a stretch of beach to walk on, I conclude the tide is too high and it's unlikely. Raph had come from somewhere beyond the tide pools that night he stumbled upon me, I remember, and I follow the cliff farther. Looking for someone? I swallow a shriek and point the pitchfork in Raph's direction. His chuckle catches in the wind. You're much more terrifying with your axe, he taunts, and steps out of the shadows. His arms fold over his chest, and per usual, he has a look that's far too amused for my liking. It practically beams in the darkness. What are you doing out here? I bite out. Going for a stroll, he says easily, like you. Liar. I grip the pitchfork tighter and straighten. What's the real reason, and don't lie to me. Or what? You'll poke me? I glare at him. I think you know I'm capable of doing much more than poking you. Raph laughs. Careful who you say that to, Samara. That almost sounds indecent. His eyebrows waggle as he takes a step closer, proving he's not the least bit intimidated. Glaring daggers at him only seems to amuse the infuriating man more. Talk, I demand, Now, or I'll raise the alarm and everyone will want to know the same thing. Raph stares at me, his expression narrowing as he comes to terms with the fact I'm very serious, and he clearly doesn't want to risk that. I'm meeting someone. He finally says, meeting someone in the middle of the night? I eye him carefully. Sounds nefarious. It might, but not in the way you probably think. I'm listening. Raph drops his arms from his chest and runs one of his hands through his curly black hair. I've never seen him look anxious before, and I hold my breath. I'm meeting a friend, he admits. One I don't want my mother to know about. My head tilts of its own accord, and I can't help my intrigue. Why not? Because, he clips, he is not who she would wish me to be with. Raph stares at me, waiting for his words to sink in. My eyes widen. Oh. The tension in my shoulders loosens, and I shift on my feet. I didn't realize. I thought you were sneaking off to do something treacherous. I lower the pitchfork, resting the end in the sand. Raph's cocky grin returns. I am, depending on who you ask. Is that what you and your mother were arguing about today? What had Isa said? That Raph was a man of his word. Seeing how he's practically Mexican royalty, I wonder if he's betrothed to some girl back home he doesn't wish to be with. But Raph's expression knits with confusion. You know, when you came to find me? I prompt. Finally, he seems to remember, and his frown deepens, his lips pressing into a thin line. No, he admits. My mother doesn't know. Not about this. While I can understand his secrecy, I'm still confused. Then what was your argument about? Raph is thoughtful as the wind whips around us. I'm beginning to question the truth in his words as he contemplates his answer for far too long, and I grip the pitchfork tighter, prepared to demand an answer. The men, all of us, we thought we would only be here for a fortnight. Now my mother worries they will grow restless. While that makes sense, it doesn't feel like the entire truth. And your mother worries about your honor because? Raph's eyes narrow on me, as if he's seeing me anew. The men don't like being idle, he explains. They came here with the promise of a raid after your father took care of business, and now we are stuck here, it would seem. There will be no raid. Not in the near future, anyway. She worries what the men will think, is all. Should we be worried? A spark of urgency fills me, because this is exactly what I've feared since the moment I saw their ship. Having restless raiders hunkered down in our village is beyond dangerous. It's borderline suicidal, regardless of my father's intentions. The men here are loyal to your father, Samara. Don't worry yourself. Don't worry? I scoff. That Raph can make light of our fear and vulnerability in having them here proves he's only ever seen one side of things, and his ignorance is maddening. Has anyone ever slaughtered your village? He must realize how insensitive he's being, and he sighs, running his hand through his hair, only for it to fall into his eyes again. My mother can always find something to worry about, he says, especially here, with so much out of her control. His irritation is palpable, and though a voice in the back of my mind warns me he could be lying about everything, Raph respects my father. I've seen them together enough to feel sickened by it, and I don't think Raph would go against him. And I can't imagine he's inventing a scandalous rendezvous, unless that's a lie too. I scrutinize the shadows surrounding us. You can come out, Raph says, and as the air shifts behind me, I feel someone's presence and whirl around. Hector, I breathe. His cropped hair glistens in the moonlight, though his face is masked by shades of night. My hands clam up, and I glance between the two men. It's then I realize I've only seen Hector smile a couple of times, and it's always been around Raph. And given the circumstances of their childhoods together, it makes sense the two of them could be more than friends. It's easy to imagine Raph is to Hector what Link has always been to me, the pillar in a storm of uncertainty. I swallow thickly, feeling my intrusion far more keenly than I expected. Right. Well, I stutter. I should go. Raph chuckles again, and I lift the pitchfork, glaring at him. You're lucky I don't stick you anyway for making me get out of bed. I pretend to prod him with it, but I'm far too relieved to be seriously thwarted. Raph lifts his palms in surrender, but his smile doesn't fade, and with that, I turn back for the village. Samara, he says, just loud enough to hear over the wind. When I glance back, he and Hector are standing shoulder to shoulder, two strapping raiders who look terrifyingly beautiful in the moonlight. You won't say anything about this? Raph doesn't look smug or sound cocky. Instead, his question rings with apprehension. I'm not sure if he fears his mother's derision, my father's, or the rest of the men's, but I know what it's like to long for someone just out of reach, and as Link flashes to mind, I feel an unexpected kinship with Raph, maybe even a fondness. Glancing between them, I dip my chin. You have my word. Chapter 21. I was up at dawn. I couldn't get Raph's situation out of my head. It's hard to imagine a man like him, powerful in his birthright and stature, a leader among men, would feel like he has to live a life of secrets. Raiders hide from no one, except from others, it would seem. Or maybe my swirling thoughts haven't been about Raph at all. Since my father arrived, I've been living in a surreal state of disbelief as every part of my life has seemingly changed. A year ago, Link would have been in the thick of it with me, but now he only lingers on the periphery, and despite him walking beside me, it feels like he's barely here at all. You're quiet this morning, he says, and elbows me as we make our way to the gardens. Our baskets are empty, mine swinging at my side as we trudge through the damp earth toward the fields. With another stormless morning, we continue with our chores, this time harvesting the crops that are ready for preserving. Today's task, radish picking. I didn't sleep much last night. It's all I can offer him, because I refuse to give Raph's secret away, even to Link. And as hard-hitting as the realization is, keeping a secret from Link doesn't feel as wrong as it would have before. Does your father still snore like a cougar in a cave? He asks. I'm sure that's taking some getting used to again. There's humor in Link's voice, and a waning smile flickers across my lips, but it's gone quickly. I'm not sure the 4 days since my father's return is enough time to have fully accepted his being home, at least not enough to laugh about it. No, actually, he's not as bad as I remember. Link chuckles. Lucky. Despite Violet's primness, she snores. Loudly. He spins on his heel to face me. Don't tell her I told you that, though, Mar. He warns, wagging his finger at me. I roll my eyes. I wouldn't dream of it, I mutter. But my attention strays to the fenced-off root fields where Eric, Wyatt, Cynthia, and Gil are spread out harvesting. I stop at the gate, realizing Eric isn't picking, but clipping wire for a snare. What's he doing? I notice the ropes and metal cages piled on a handcart at the edge of the garden. Looks like vermin trouble, Link muses, and he opens the gate for us to step inside. Rows of green heaps stretch out in the quarter-acre plot in front of us, one of a few gardens we have in the flattest part of the valley. In a place where sun is scant, the earth is moist, and the winds are strong, we rely on our root vegetables to brave the seasons. The burlap canopy lets in as much light as the clouds allow, soaking up as much of the water as possible in the process. The earth squishes beneath my feet, and I pray the crops are okay, even with the blending seasons. I stop beside Wyatt as he sets a snare at the edge of the field. I notice the dug-up earth around the mangled onions. Gophers? I ask, scouring the ground for holes. I don't see any, but I imagine they are all over the place. Of all the raids over the years, gophers have always been one of our greatest adversaries. Gophers, raccoons, skunks. Wyatt shrugs, his red hair flopping into his frustrated green eyes as he struggles with a knot. Fleetingly, I recall my comment to him the other day, not realizing it was his noose that nearly let our boar dinner get away. I've always struggled with knots, I admit. Link continues down the onion row to talk to his father, and I crouch to help Wyatt. Do you mind if I show you something? I nod to the rope he's struggling with. Wyatt's face blooms with red, and he nods in consent. It gets all fumbled when I pull it through. I don't know what I'm always doing wrong. It's like my fingers won't work the way I want them to. I chuckle, knowing the struggle well. Hunting isn't my forte either, trust me. But Gil showed me something once that might be helpful. I take the rope in my hand. Instead of the quick, expert flutter of fingers I've seen Eric employ time and again, I lay the rope out and double the end back before slowly wrapping it twice. Unlike reading the grain in the wood for the best cuts or triaging it for pieces that best suit my task, I can't rely on muscle memory or routine to tie a knot, recalling only the basics. Each step is slow and unpracticed. It's not a fast way of doing it, I admit when my misshapen noose is almost finished. When I can't thread the fraying rope through the wraparound, I point at the knife at Wyatt's belt. He hands it to me, his eyes wide with interest. It's ugly, but it should hold. With the tip of the blade, I needle the end of the rope through and pull it tight on the other side. Holding it up, I grimace. Eric's knots definitely look better, but the technique still works, I say, testing it as the snare loosens and tightens. Maybe try this until you can figure out the quicker way, and I can make you some more ropes. These are horrible. Wyatt's eyes meet mine, and he rises to his feet. Thanks, Samara. A small smile tugs the corner of his mouth. Sure, I shrug, and feel Eric's presence behind me before Wyatt notices him. I turn around to find Eric eyeing the snare. It's crap, I admit. I know, but It works, he says, glancing from me to Wyatt. One more to set up at the far end, he tells him, and Wyatt jumps to it with a brisk nod. I sense Eric's eyes on me as I grab my basket, and though I tell myself not to, I look at him, uncertain if he's going to criticize my skills. He opens his mouth to say something, but his eyes shift past me, narrowing instantly. Raph's voice meets my ears as I glance over my shoulder. This time he and Hector have bows and arrows to go with their blades. They stop at the gate. You're gone early, Raph says. Your father was wondering where you were. Having a tea party, I tell him, gesturing to the garden. Raph peers around, as if it's his first time seeing the fields. Your men wouldn't be helping themselves to our crops, would they? Eric asks, but it doesn't sound like a question, so much as an accusation. My head whips to him. I thought it was critters. Eric shakes his head, his attention fixed on Raph and Hector. I haven't found any animal tracks, only footprints, but... He shrugs. Who knows? I could be wrong. Eric's tone implies he doesn't think he's wrong in the slightest, and Raph sneers. Raph's dark features are menacing enough. He doesn't need to throw a glare into the mix, but he does, and it seems to sharpen the longer he stares at Eric. Our men wouldn't help themselves to your food, he says. He sounds just as certain as Eric does. If we did, we wouldn't need to hunt. He holds up his bow. Well, Eric counters, someone is. Raph's eyebrows lower. And it couldn't possibly be any of your people? Stealing from themselves? Eric says tersely. Not likely. We aren't thieves. Raph bites back. Eric glowers at him. No, only murderers. Hey, I say, holding up my palms. The tension blazes between them. Raph, just talk to your guys and make sure, okay? We'll do the same. They both stare at one another for a few drawn-out breaths that make me shift uncomfortably. The last thing we need is a feud between us. stuck together for the next couple of months. Raph's eyes are unfocused, and I worry what thoughts are brewing behind them. All right, I prompt again. I glance between Eric and Raph, worried they won't let it go, until Hector nudges Raph, which seems to stir him, and his pinched features soften ever so slightly. Finally, Raph nods and continues on his way. Hector glances at me, eyes lingering for the briefest of moments, but I'm not sure what message he's conveying before he follows after Raph. I glare at Eric. Do you always have to be such a thoughtless brute? I snip, but the moment I say it, I know that's not entirely who he is. His jaw flexes and he drags his focus from Raph's retreating form to me. I feel like there's a better way you could have handled that, Eric. My shoulders drop, and with a sigh, I rub my forehead. I get that it's hard having them here. Trust me. If anyone does, it's me. But we're stuck with them for a while, so can you try not to make this worse than it has to be? Eric's brown eyes shift over my face, the corners creasing as he scrutinizes me, and when I can't take it anymore, I look away. Fine, do whatever you want. What's one more problem? I mutter. Leaving Eric to his brooding thoughts, I head for the radish patch. I don't know if it's my imagination, but it's as if I can still feel his eyes on me, and as a prickle rakes over my skin, I grip my basket tighter to keep from looking back. Chapter 22. Another day, another storm. Lightning and wind, but no rain. It moves in off the sea, a roiling tempest that feels more ominous than the last. I feel Gil's absence keenly, being stuck indoors with Issa and Raph again. In the week since their arrival, I've had to work far harder than I ever have to ignore the sting of the truth. My father hasn't brought up my returning south with him since he first arrived, and I can't help but wonder if he's changed his mind, because I'm certain his being here is more difficult than he imagined. He was far too eager to brave the storm upon hearing some of his men drank themselves stupid and started a brawl, and has gone to see the extent of the damage in the longhouse. And the less I see my father, the easier it is to see the truth. Lightning storms are far less terrifying to my father than I am. A clap of thunder, accompanied by a flash, shakes the cottage to punctuate the sentiment, and my fingers stroke the puckered skin on my face, ensuring it's still there, as if I could ever be rid of it. It feels like it will never end, Raph mutters, and he crouches to stoke the fire. Issa sighs as she removes her apron, finally satisfied the table is scrubbed as clean as it can be, and that our dinner bowls are dry and stacked away. She pulls her embroidery from one of the trunks and takes her usual place in Gil's rocking chair beside me. There's another clap of thunder, only it shakes the earth this time, causing Issa and Raph to brace themselves as they hold their breaths. I watch them with more amusement than I probably should. After a few heartbeats, they glance at each other with a collective exhale. I don't think I'll ever grow used to the storms here, Issa says, and with another steadying sigh, she goes back to her stitching. This is how it always is. I don't give it much thought anymore. Yes, Issa mutters. We're well aware of your bravery. Nothing scares you. It's not praise in her voice, but exasperation. It's not bravery, I tell her. It's our reality. And lightning is terrifying, I add. I feel like a broken record when it comes to these people. Marco and Samantha, they have the marks on their skin to prove it. That they are alive when the others have died from the same fate is a daily reminder of what luck is in a place like this. None of us wish for the storms, nor do we like them. They simply are. Issa eyes me a moment longer, and I wonder if it's respect that makes her gaze linger before she situates herself to fully face the fire. As she settles her skirts, a rich redwood color with ivory flowers stitched along the hem, I notice the glint of a knife sheathed in her boot, but it's covered with her skirts again just as quickly. I'm not sure why I'm so surprised Issa keeps a knife on her. I suppose it makes perfect sense. No one could be unscathed amidst a life of raiders and surviving a murderous, power-hungry husband. Despite her elegance and compulsive need for cleanliness, I can imagine she's got a few battle wounds of her own, even if they aren't visible. Suddenly, her sharp glares, disapproving tone, and silent judgments don't seem quite as offensive. Raph rises from stoking the fire in the hearth. I can't stand the idleness. How about the game of chess? He strolls over to one of his mother's trunks. I wait for Issa to rouse from her embroidery, but her attention is fixed on the emerald outline of a blossom. Eventually, she must feel my gaze because she looks up. He is not speaking to me, she says with amusement. I never learned how to play chess. Nor will she try, Raph grumbles, bringing over a board inland with Pearl. So, it falls on you to try to best me, Samara. I admire the intricacies of the board's craftsmanship. It shimmers in the firelight. If your mother doesn't know how to play, then how did you learn? Your father, he says, setting out the pieces. Although I know it shouldn't feel like a blow, it does. It hammers another nail into my chest along with the others. Well, I say, and I hate that my voice betrays my hurt. I never learned how to play either. Raph's hand stills on a glass game piece, and he looks at me through a fan of dark lashes. His gaze lingers, thoughtful for a moment. Then let's change that, shall we? He leans back and gestures to the board. I'll teach you. We have plenty of time. He mutters the last part under his breath. Feeling Issa's attention on me, I decide distraction is best, and I agree. I must warn you, though, I say, tracing a horse's head etched in crystal. The edges are smooth and translucent compared to Raph's frosted pieces. When I learn something, I won't rest until I am the best at it. I smirk, excitement bubbling up inside me. I have no doubt. A grin spreads across his face, splitting his cheeks with a Raph-like amusement I can't help but smile at in answer. He grabs the jug from the center of the table and pours himself some of their fancy wine. In fact, he says, I'm looking forward to it. Raph pours me a cup as well. You'll need this. He hands it to me with a wink, then nods to the board. Now, set your pieces up to match mine, and I'll explain what each one is and which direction you're allowed to move them. I take a sip from the cup, my senses assaulted, but not unpleasantly. The wine is sweet, almost like honey. Agave, Raph says, distracted. We use it in many things back home. He gestures to the board again. Now, come. Time to play. Licking my lips, I set my cup aside and mirror my game pieces to his, appreciating the intricate embellishments and the beauty of a simple game. I catch myself doing what Raph and Issa have done almost daily, comparing everything about our lives in Ebonpeak to theirs. Even the games Link and I played as children were made from wood and trinkets washed ashore, everything crudely cut, rusted, or tattered and torn. It's only now, as I glance from Issa to her fancy trunks and fabrics, then to the game board in front of me, that I realize what Ebonpeak must seem like to them. A time capsule of sorts, a mud puddle of a village surviving at the fringe of existence. What's it like in Mexico? I ask, taking another sip of my wine. I've heard stories about how it once was, rich with history and tropical lands. I know it was once a refuge, like the sunken city, that many ships sailing south to escape the cold ended up there, but no one I know has ever been, except my father. I've tried not to wonder, even told myself I don't care about Oaxaca or sailing, but the truth is, everything about Issa, Raph, and the Raiders, all of it, feels like another reality, and I can't help my growing fascination. There's a twitch in Issa's lips, and her long dark lashes flick to me. We live in a magnificent city, she says with pride, and perhaps fondness. It's the first time I've seen true softness in her features. The music, the markets, the colorful capital, and the architecture is unlike anywhere else, as much European as it is ancient. It's the most beautiful city left in the world. While I don't doubt its grandeur, I wonder if Issa has traveled the world in order to know such a thing. Don't forget about the swarming insects that darken the sky after a rainstorm, and dysentery that wreaks havoc after a flood. Raph adds blandly. I think it's for my benefit, and I try not to smile as his mother gives him a weary look. It's a wonder you even wish to return home, if it's so horrible, she says. Raph ignores her, and the ever-present tension between them thickens, so taut it's nearly visible. Unbidden, I feel another swell of kinship with Raph. Mother versus son, father versus daughter. Two pairs that will likely never meet in the middle. And your English? I say. For being from such a foreign place, a world away, they speak it far better than I would have expected. Isa glares at me. You expected us to sound like barbarians? I expected many things, I volley back, but I thought your English would be less prominent. Isa and I stare at one another. Can we play? Raph says impatiently. He holds up one of the game pieces. This is your queen, Samara. She is... The cottage door flies open, and we all turn to find Hector breathless in the doorway. He leans in, his eyes wide on Raph, and the wind that whirls around him makes the flames inside the hearth flicker. Fuego, he rasps, gasping for breath. The barn, it's on fire. When Hector's eyes shift to me, I realize he's talking about our barn. Fergus! I rush for the door, knowing he's trapped inside. A firm hand clamps around my arm, and Raph tugs me back. Be careful, he says as thunder and dry lightning clamor overhead. Don't be foolish. Tugging my arm from his hold, I grab my axe off the wall and rush past Hector out into the storm. The wind tears at my hair and the sky flashes with purple lightning above. But all I can see are building flames, consuming the front and side of the barn and whirling in the wind as it's fueled stronger. Only vaguely do I register Hector and Raph running to the water barrels with buckets. Fergus brays inside, and I stumble back as flames spread, licking up the corners and onto the roof. I swing my axe as hard as I can into the siding still untouched by the flames, over and over. The inferno crackles closer, its heat pressing against my face, warning me back. But the more frightened Fergus becomes, kicking and braying inside, the harder and faster I swing, again and again. Lightning strikes one of the rods on the wall. It's nearly blinding, but I don't stop. There's a cacophony of shouting, and a couple more bodies appear, water splashing as they try to prevent the fire from jumping to the cottage in the gusting wind. I swing at the siding until finally the wood is splintered enough and Fergus barrels through. I drop my axe, running after him before he can get too far away. Grabbing onto his mane, I wrangle him past the others dousing the fire and into the cottage where it's safe. I ignore the sharp pain that shoots through my hip as I bump the table out of my way to make room for him. Fergus brays and heaves for breath, his eyes wild with fear as I stroke his face, attempting to ease him. It's okay, I whisper, but the scent of charred flesh fills my nose. I realize he's not unscathed, and in the flickering light of the cottage, I examine Fergus more carefully. His hindquarters are burned and in need of dressing, and wounds on his face and front legs glisten in the firelight. Crouching beside him, I exhale with relief, wondering when I grew so attached to the old guy. I cradle his head against my chest, petting him and cooing more reassurances as the storm rages above. And for the first time, I allow myself to consider that life away from this place might not be entirely bad. Chapter 23. From the hill, I can see the smoke still wafting from the village, filling the air with the same scent as the scorched forest. Uncertain how long we have between storms, it's a mad dash to gather wood and supplies to repair what's been burned. With Gil, Link, and a few raiders rebuilding the barn, my father helps others in the village with their wind repairs, while Raph, Hector, and I prepare more wood for siding. Sweat beads on my brow despite the overcast day, but I relish the heat and lack of wind. I haven't felt the burn in my muscles in so long. I relish that too. Lift, swing, thunk. It's smart that you store most of the wood away from the village, Hector says as he and Raph carry a long slab of redwood toward the cart. Without Fergus, it's hooked to one of Kenneth's steers to haul it home. This is not lift, swing, thunk. The first time, lift, swing, thunk. This has happened. I right myself and blow a loose strand of hair from my face. With a deep breath, I watch as Raph and Hector work seamlessly together. They anticipate each other's every step as Raph walks backward, both of their muscles straining. I don't even think they realize how whole they are as a pair. What happens when you run out? Raph asks as they drop the plank with a grunt. The cart shakes under its sudden weight, and the steer looks at them, eyes wide, chewing on a mouthful of grass. We've come close a few times, but We haven't run out yet. I turn back to the log I'm chopping in half. Lift, swing, thunk. Lift, swing, thunk. Do you ever slow down? Raph calls over the sound of my blade cracking wood. I try not to, I admit. At least come have some water, he says. When I glance over my shoulder, he holds up a water skin. You're making us look bad. I can't help but smile as a rueful grin fills his face. If you insist. I prop my axe against the log. I'm not sure when I started trusting Raph, but I do. It feels foolish to, and yet it's a constant battle to remind myself I shouldn't. I do insist. He smirks, amused per usual, though I don't know why, and he hands me the water. Hector unloads an armful of firewood into the cart and comes to join us. Do you lose many structures? He asks. I shrug, because even one is too many, if only because fire is so dangerous and easily spread. The lightning rods usually help, but we have lost a handful over the years. I'm not sure how you do it. Trapped indoors a whole season? Raph shakes his head. I need fresh air and the sea. Agreed, Hector says. Being trapped indoors is more difficult than I thought it would be. But good company helps, I guess. Hector and Raph glance at one another, and while there is nothing overtly obvious between them, I can feel the unspoken hum of tension. My cheeks burn with sudden discomfort. I feel like an intruder on their time together. Needing to break the awkward and strangely intimate moment, I gesture to the hills and wood storages around us, giant wood lofts and overhangs to keep as much wood as we can dry. At least we can come outside between storms. There's always work to be done. Raph's stance widens, and he folds his arms over his chest. Only to rebuild ruin, he counters. You work your fingers to the bone, and for what? That's not leaving Samara. That's surviving. Nothing more. I've always thought Raph and Issa are so different, but he sounds as disapproving as she always does. And after such a long, tumultuous night, the last thing I need is for him to point out the plight of our existence here. My tongue lashes whip quick. I'd rather worry about storms and work my fingers to the bone to survive than live in a palace built on the blood of innocent people. I shake my head at him. You and your mother judge us so easily, but she says herself she has everything in Oaxaca, yet she is still a bitter, judgmental woman. We don't live in a palace, Raph retorts. It's an estate. A very large one. I roll my eyes as if it really matters. Raph's expression shadows, not to resemble anger, so much as sadness. I know it's hard to imagine, he says in earnest, but my mother is not entirely bad. Hector looks at him with a glint of surprise, and once again, I wonder what Hector's life has been like since he was brought in as a slave. Perhaps she's not. I hand him his water skin, but I wouldn't know since she's detested me and this place since she arrived. Sometimes I'm certain she really does hate me, but I have no idea why. Raph averts his gaze, staring at the winking sea on the distant horizon. It's not personal, he explains, but I'm not sure I believe him. She's a complicated woman with a complicated past. She's had to fight for everything she's ever had, and she worries she'll lose it with so much change. While a remote part of me can understand Issa's fears, I can't fathom what she would lose by my father coming for me. It's not as if she has to worry about him lavishing me with the attention she clearly wants for herself. He barely looks at me. Hector and Raph regard one another. I can't interpret the unspoken conversation transpiring between them, but whatever it is, it feels as if I'm trespassing again. Well, she doesn't have to worry, because you will all go home and I will remain here, as if nothing has changed. I reach for my axe, knowing we have little time to waste. Your voice betrays you, Raph says, tossing the water skin into the cart. You are undecided. No, I promise him. I am not. And it's true. My life is here, with what's comfortable and familiar, with my friends, with my true family. You're being stubborn, is all, but your father warned us as much. Raph deadpans. Really? Looking back at him, I tuck a loose strand of hair behind my ear. What else did my father tell you about me? I'm both desperate and terrified to know the answer. Hector and I wait as Raph considers his reply. He told us you were rash and stubborn, but brave, like your mother. Swallowing, I squint up at the churning sky. And, I say tentatively, I know there is more because Raph knew who I was on that pier. And that, aside from being wary of all of us, you might not be happy to see him after the way things were left. That he abandoned you right after your mother died, even though you were willing to do anything to make him stay. Raph does me a kindness, I realize, by not spelling it out entirely. And he was right. He says easily. My eyes dart to his. You're rash and stubborn, but he forgot to warn me about one thing. I frown. What's that? You flail like seagrass when you wield your axe. I have a nick in my side to prove it. He can't finish before I punch him in the shoulder, unable to resist a laugh at the image he conjures. Raph and Hector chuckle, and as I take a step closer to knock Raph upside the head, he grabs a hold of my wrist. My breath catches in my throat as our eyes lock and the easiness of his smile falters. Seriously, he says, and his severity gives me pause. We should practice more. Your fighting, your swings. My eyes narrow on him, and I cock my head to the side. I'll have you know I've bested almost everyone here. But life on the sea is harsher than life here, Samara. I know you think you're tough, but you will need to be tougher. There's an earnest warning in his voice, and I shake my head. I told you, I'm not going back. Raph drops my arm, and his eyes search mine. I'm not sure what he's looking for, but I have little time to wonder before I hear footsteps. Hector's eyes fixate on whoever is behind us, and when I turn around, Eric is standing at the log pile, his features hardened into place as usual, and soot smears his cheek. Your father mentioned you needed help, he says begrudgingly, and he grips his axe tightly. The way Eric's eyes fix on Raph brings an untoward thought to mind. My cheeks would flush if I thought it remotely possible they are posturing one another. Eric barely tolerates me, and I am not Raph's type. I'm sure you have your own tasks to tend to, I say. It's an out Eric clearly wants, and I've had enough awkwardness over the past week to last a lifetime. It seems an effort, but Eric drags his attention from Raph to me. I'm sure you have plenty to do at the tanning shack, I prompt. Eric's jaw twitches. We haven't been able to hunt, he reminds me, and the bite in his tone that I'm so used to is back. But Eric is right, and suddenly my words sound snide, which wasn't my intent. I know how it is during the storms. Animals are smart enough to scatter and hide, which means Eric's income will be lacking, his hands more idle than he prefers, and I've just reminded him of that. Suit yourself, I nod to his axe. You can help with the firewood, I continue, determined to stay focused. Then we can load up and head back to help the others. We'll need to make a couple of trips anyway. With a brusque dip of his chin, Eric tugs a log that's easily the length of him, effortlessly from the pile, sending it thudding to the ground. His vest and trousers are covered with dirt, and his exposed skin and shorn hair glisten in the humidity. Without a second thought, he begins chopping the wood to pieces. His movements are far swifter and more forceful than mine, and I feel sorry for the log as he cleaves into it. I do, however, admire the way his muscles flex with each lift of his arms, and how the power of his grip on the axe is so resolute. I've never seen him wield an axe before, and that I appreciate the sight makes my skin flame hotter than the afternoon heat. Raph clears his throat behind me, and when I glance over my shoulder, his eyebrow is raised skeptically. Ignoring him, I go back to chopping, heaving alongside Eric, suddenly unable to stand still. Chapter 24. When it's time to return to the village to deliver more materials, Eric sets off first, determined to put some distance between him and us. I'll catch up, Raph says, nodding toward a live oak a few paces back. We nod as he scuttles off to take care of business. Hector tugs on the steer's harness, and we start back toward the village, unhurried as we wait for Raph to pee. I've never been alone with Hector, and a dozen questions I've been longing to ask him jump on the tip of my tongue. "Can I ask you something?" I say, my eyes taking stock of the white-lined scar on his tawny eyebrow before drifting to the collar of his shirt, which I know hides more scars. Hector glances at me with a barely-there smile, as if he knows I'll ask it, regardless of his answer. "Is it difficult for you, living with people whose legacy is built on the blood of our families?" Hector's jaw tightens, but he doesn't look displeased by the question as much as thoughtful. "Sometimes." I ask because I have this internal battle with myself about whether or not I can trust them. It feels wrong to, but if you do, after everything you've been through, I shrug. "I've been with the family for a very long time, Samara. It's different for me." It makes sense. Issa and Raph, the life they live, it's all Hector really knows. It's Issa I can't wrap my mind around, I admit. She's so cold. Hector pats the steer's neck, his fingers playing with the fringe of its russet hair. "Yes," he says simply. "She is." While I didn't expect Hector to say Issa has been like a mother to him, I didn't expect sadness in his voice either. But still, you stay with them. You trust them. Hector's golden eyes shift to me, and his brow twitches with thought. "I trust Raph," he says without hesitation. "He's not like his father. I thought he would be before I met him, but he's nothing like him." I nod as we take a few more steps. "When did you know?" "Almost immediately." Hector glances behind us in Raph's direction, but I don't look away from him for fear he'll stop explaining. "A cruel man brought me to a spoiled child to be his plaything," he says, his voice low. "That's what I'd thought when I saw all Raph's jewels and clothes and toys, his playroom and his horses. But those were just things that people could see. Behind closed doors, I saw enough to know Raph was as beaten and broken as I was in many ways. His father wasn't only cruel to slaves and women." Hector watches me, and it's almost as if I can see their childhood unraveling in my mind's eye. Little boys finding comfort in one another from the monster. "We are not all like our father, Samara. You know that as well as the rest of us." "You better not be plotting without me," Raph calls as he hurries toward us. I glance back at him as he adjusts his belt, but I can feel Hector's eyes on me. "Of course we are," I tell him as he comes around the other side of the cart and falls into step beside his friend. "No wonder most everyone in your village is sinewy," Raph mutters. "These hills are steeper than they look." "You say I need to toughen up," I muse, "but you're too soft from so much sailing." Raph smirks, and his eyes meet Hector's. "Probably true." While Raph finds reasons to flash that arrogant smile of his at everyone throughout the day, making people see what he wants them to, Hector rarely grins. So watching them, seeing how easy they are together when no one else is around, makes the raiders seem far more human to me than I ever thought possible. I guess they aren't really raiders anyway, not in the traditional sense. My father and the men who left with him 6 years ago made sure of that. Raph, Hector, Andrik, all of them are hardworking men who have lived a brutal life, but they are no more evil than the rest of us trying to survive in this world. They may live by a different code, but they aren't boorish and unfeeling people. Hector has shown me that more than anyone. My head hurts thinking about the twisted paths that have brought all of us to this moment, and I push my musing away for another day when I've had more sleep. With the days so warm, I appreciate the slight breeze the closer we get to the water, and as the cart road veers right and Hector's laugh catches my ear, a thought strikes me. "Hey," I call, falling farther behind. "I'm going to take a shorter route and grab a snack along the way," I tell them, and nod toward the persimmon orchard. It's not necessarily shorter, but they don't need to know that. Raph gives me a non-committal wave, lost in their conversation, and I duck into the trees, allowing Raph and Hector a little more time together. While I know Raph and Issa are eager to return south, I wonder how different this place will feel when they are gone. It isn't as if Raph and I are very close, but there is an unexpected tether between us. And not just my knowing his secret, it's the peculiarity of the situation we've been thrust into. Knowing Raph can no more control my father inserting himself into his world as I could control my father removing himself from mine, only to thrust us all together in the end. And I dare to think I might actually miss Raph's conceited grin when he's gone. Maybe. As I weave between trees, cutting toward the village, I eye the shiny orange fruit ripening in the limbs reaching out around me. I consider picking one to snack on when muttering reaches my ears. I stop, glancing through the rows of trees. At first, I think someone is picking the fruit, and as I continue deeper, I hear male voices, louder this time. I wonder if Kenneth is leading an early harvest, and weave around a few more trees. 2 men in sweat-stained shirts and tattered trousers sit on a log, their backs to me as they skin what looks like squirrels. I frown. A rabbit pelt is strung up over the branch of one of the trees, and there's a makeshift shelter farther in. Radishes and potatoes are heaped beside them. From our garden. Quickly, I glance around for weapons, for bows, arrows, or axes, but see only the knives in their hands. No man would be out here with only a skinning blade, so I know their weapons must be inside the shelter. I reach for my axe, but a cold knife presses against the column of my neck. My pulse spikes, my mouth runs dry, and I silently curse as my axe is torn from my backstrap and thrown off to the side with a thud. The 2 men peer back at us, their expressions a mixture of surprise and contempt as they rise to their feet. "Welcome," the man behind me rumbles in my ear. The blade feels heavy against my sweat-dampened skin. It's not often we stumble across vagrants, especially during storm season, but when we do, they aren't usually a threat. The dagger at my throat, however, tells me otherwise. All villagers along the coast have the same enemy as we do. Raiders. It's only then that I understand why these men haven't come into the village. La Condesa is both a beacon of bounty and a warning to stay away. The 2 men by the fire approach, scanning me up and down as if they aren't sure what to make of me. I don't look like a raider, but I doubt they've seen a woman with a face as displeasing to the eye as mine is. When their gazes linger on my chest, rising and falling in controlled breaths beneath my vest, however, I conclude they care little about my face, and I have an innate need to shrink away. "Don't move," the man at my throat warns. "You can have whatever food you want," I tell them, my voice a practiced calm. "You aren't bothering anyone." I watch the way their jaws twitch beneath scraggly, unkempt beards and dirt-smeared faces. It's not difficult to live off the land, so they look well-fed, but their black hair and dark skin tells me they are not from here, which makes me wonder where they've come from, or rather, from whom they've been hiding. Even if they lack the well-honed physiques of the raiders, I'm acutely aware I'm outnumbered and concealed in the orchard, where no one is likely to see me or hear me scream. The man at my side sniffs my neck, and I can't help the ripple of unease that prickles my skin. He digs the knife blade deeper. "How many more of you are out here?" I barely hear the rasps of his words over my hiss of pain. "2," I grit out. It's a partial lie, since Raph and Hector are halfway back to the village by now. I consider shouting for them, but the blade at my throat could be my end in an instant. "I don't believe you," the man mutters, and the dagger nicks my tender flesh. I bite my lip as warm blood trickles down my neck. "If you hurt me, the raiders will kill you. You won't be able to hide from them." "Not if we're gone when they come looking for you," one of them says, flipping his knife over in his hand. "I am the captain's daughter," I tell them, my voice full of warning, their eyes alight with something fiendish. "Is that so?" one of them hums. Another one chuckles. "Well, isn't this a surprise?" It won't matter where you go, I grit out, but their enlivened eyes worry me. They will hunt you down and kill you if anything happens to me. The men glance at each other, exchanging a silent conversation. As they do with most things, my instincts take over, rash as they might be. These men don't have their weapons. They think they have me. And as I feel the hair rise on the back of my arms, imagining what they might do to me, I know I have to act before I'm completely apprehended. In their moment of deliberation, I drop to my knees, feeling the blade biting at my neck as it's torn away, and I lunge for my axe. The instant the handle is heavy in my grasp, I spin around. My grip tightens as the axe head resists against flesh and bone. But finally, the man with the dagger falls with a cry of agony as one of his legs is cut to a stump. A knife pierces my shoulder from behind, and I shriek in pain as I whirl around again, slamming the axe head into the man's face. He falls, knocked out cold, and I jolt to my feet. A fist hits my temple, knocking me back. My vision blurs and my axe nearly falls from my hand, but my grip is iron. Head pounding, I lift and swing again, screaming as the hole in my shoulder sears with pain. But I swing again, and again. I haven't survived hell the past 20 years to meet my end by the hands of a few drifters. Each strike is messy and less controlled, but the man jumps back, keeping his distance. Stumpy shouts from the ground, demanding my blood, and the man left standing sneers at me, determination etching his face. Despite my sparring skills, I can feel my limbs growing heavy and the warmth of my blood dripping down my arm and back. My shoulder feels like fire, and it's all I can do to squelch the searing pain. "Kill the bitch!" Stumpy orders. "Kill her!" Pushing him from my mind, I swing again, refusing to give the last drifter time to hatch a new plan. But as ironclad as my will to maim them is, my shoulder feels as if it's tearing apart, and my arm drops midway. I lose my balance, falling to my knees again. My head is fuzzy, but I shake it away, holding my axe at arm's length to keep space between the drifter and me. I blink, trying to focus, but he's running away. For his weapon. Ears throbbing with Stumpy shouting behind me, I rise to my feet. Sweat beads on my skin, and my chest heaves with each laborious breath. But I will be the last of us standing when this is over. "Bent, kill the bitch already!" I twist and swing the axe, feeling a tinge of satisfaction when my blade crunches against bone again, and Stumpy gurgles. I pull my axe from his throat, smelling the stench of the other man behind me before his arm locks around my throat and he yanks me back. My body contorts against him. I cringe and drop my axe as I lose my footing. A blade thrusts into my side. A blinding, agonizing pain I struggle to process as I claw at the man's arm in momentary panic. As my fingernails catch on a strip of cloth around his forearm, I bite him as hard as I can and tear into what I hope is a wound with my fingers. He curses, lurching in sudden pain, and I ram the back of my head into his face. His nose crunches. His grip on me loosens, and the blade in my side tugs as he stumbles back into a tree trunk. Crying in pain, I spin around, barely able to stay upright, and pull the blade out of my side before I jab it into his neck. He's pinned between the tree and me, and I rest my forehead on his shoulder, leaning my weight into him to prop myself up as I twist the knife deeper. I don't hear his gurgled cries as much as feel them reverberating against me as I try to catch my breath. "Move, Samara." I squeeze my eyes shut as my vision blurs and the world tilts a little. I don't know if there are more men, but whatever energy I have left is fading with each breath. "Move." When the man's body goes completely limp, I push off him and stagger back as he falls to the ground. The life in his eyes is gone. I turn to the man still unconscious from the blunt force of my axe head and stumble. I tell myself it's either him or me as I fall to my knees beside him. Exhaling a ragged breath, I slit his throat. I don't know how much of the blood on my arms and hands is theirs or mine, but I know I don't have much time. An alarming sense of dread fills me as I realize I can barely lift my arms or even breathe, and I won't survive if more men come. My side and shoulder burn as I reach for my axe, and my eyes fill with tears. Using the handle, I climb clumsily to my feet and force my legs to carry me toward the village, my axe dragging behind me. Warm blood soaks my clothes, and somehow the lightness in my head makes my limbs feel heavier, weighing me down. I stumble over tree roots and drop my axe, but each time I force myself to retrieve it, a faint voice warning me I might need it again. I don't know how many steps I take or how much time passes, but as soon as the walls of the village come into view, a rush of relief swallows me. I choke out a sob and strain to hear the calming sound of the waves over the whir in my ears. The breeze whips over me, helping me forward, and I weave through the gate. Stumbling inside, I drop to my knees. Everything feels cold as a blur of faces blink in and out of focus. There's one, however, I fixate on, and it's locked on me in horror.
Samara?
Eric's lips move, but I can't hear him. My fingers loosen around my axe as it falls from my grasp. He drops the buckets in his hands, nearly knocking over his father as he lunges for me. His outline blurs. I hear distant shouting. I feel rough hands and weightlessness as the world spins. Then everything is consumed by darkness. Chapter 25. When I open my eyes again, it feels like I've tumbled down a rocky cliff. The world is too bright, and I squeeze my eyes shut once more. With an exhale, I open them again, slowly this time. Sunlight pours in from the cottage window, and I stare up at the roof beams, waiting for my eyes to adjust and my mind to wake. As the last memories I have resurface, the pain racking my body makes sense. My pulse pounds as lingering fear chases away the remnants of sleep. There might be more. I try to sit up and grimace. Be careful. The air shifts beside me, and a waft of lavender fills my nose as dark feminine features hover over me. As I blink Issa's face into focus, the burnt umber of her eyes gleams. I lick my dry lips, blink again, and swallow against the scratch in my throat. Here, she says, and brings a cup to my mouth. My eyes flit closed as water, cool and dreamily wet, saturates my tongue. As I slurp it down, my eyes meet hers, and if I'm not mistaken, she looks a tad relieved. Leaning back, I gasp for air and lick my lips again. It feels like a chore to even breathe, and I close my eyes, inhaling a deep, steadying breath through my nose. My side twinges with pain. The men, I croak, because it's all I can manage. Were there more of them? Issa shakes her head. No. Her voice is quiet, but rough. I sigh with relief and take stock of my current state. My shoulder is bound, as is my side, and with the scent of eucalyptus in the air, I can tell she's cleaned my wounds. They were squatting in the orchard. I glance around the cottage, realizing I'm on a pallet on the floor instead of up in my loft, so that Issa could tend to me. The knowledge of that sends an unexpected calm and grateful surprise over me. Yes, your friend found their bodies. He found bones and animal skins, enough to tell they'd been there a week, if not longer. He thinks they are from the mountains, that they came here to get away from the storms. I nearly laugh. Well, Link doesn't know much about tracking. Issa shakes her head. No, the other one. Eric. I'm about to tell her he's not my friend, but my tongue refuses. He brought me home, didn't he? I lick my swollen lips, remembering Eric's face before everything faded away. He'd helped me during the lightning storm, too. Eric and a few others tracked them to somewhere near the city. But we had a storm last night. There's not much else they can do. Oh. It's only a breath as I let my reeling thoughts catch up with me before I speak again. How long have I been asleep? Off and on since yesterday. I gave you some hemlock tea to aid your pains and sleep. Link helped the healer get the herbs they needed for your wounds. Brom has been by to check on you many times, and Violet has been helping tend to you too. I frown. She what? Issa fills the cup with more water. You're surprised? A little, I admit. Issa eyes me closely and brings the cup to my lips again. Link was very worried about you, as was she. I take a few more swigs, feeling the water invigorate my body a little as it seeps in. When I'm finished, Issa takes the cup away, and since breathing hurts, I know I'm a mess. I cringe, recalling the feeling of the blade digging into my side. How bad is it? I whisper, afraid to touch anything, let alone glimpse my reflection. It hurts to blink, so I can imagine my face is a swollen mess. Your shoulder and neck will heal well enough, Issa explains, but your side, we must keep an eye on it for a while. The wound is deep, and though the bleeding stopped and you're awake, Brom said to make sure it stays clean and closed. He doesn't think the blade did any permanent damage. But no quick movements. She flashes me a look of warning. Don't worry, I can't imagine getting up anytime soon. I promise, watching her closely as she folds a clean cloth. She places it by a bowl of water. You've been taking care of me? I'm actually surprised Gil isn't the one sitting in her place, or Link even, or my father. But I can't bring myself to be too surprised that he's not. Issa doesn't humor me with a response, only rises to her feet and walks over to the wash bin to clean her hands. I take it you've had to do this a few times in the past? I say. My late husband might have been a brute, but he was not invincible. I don't know how many times he returned with wounds I wasn't sure would heal. She dries her hands on her apron. Besides, Raph begged me to make sure you live, she says, so dry and serious, I wonder if that's the only reason she's being so attentive. I exhale the curiosity. It doesn't matter either way. I know as well as everyone else how easily infection could have set in, and Issa has helped prevent that. I eye her up and down. Her hair is loose around her face, strands fallen from her partial crown of braids. But still, she's beautiful. How she can still look so perfectly poised with little sleep and in a dirty apron, I have no idea. As I take stock of her, she seems to do the same. Issa's eyes shift over my face and she shakes her head, however slight, and her brow crumples. You are very strong, Samara, she whispers. I knew you were, but... Her lips purse with deliberation. It's not exactly affection that gleams in her gaze, but pride, I think, and something else I can't discern. She seems lost in a tangle of thoughts that make her brow furrow deeper and her lips purse once more. I'm about to ask her what's wrong when her eyes refocus and she blinks. Your father has been worried, she finally says. I should let him know you're awake. Abruptly, she turns for the door, the layers of her skirt swishing as she removes her apron. She doesn't bother looking back at me as she strides from the cottage. I stare at the door a moment, uncertain of what just passed between us, but I'm only left to my thoughts for a moment before Raph flings the door open and stalks inside. His eyes flash with relief as he smiles, though it doesn't reach his eyes, and he kneels beside my pallet. I'm so sorry, Samara, he says, taking my hand in his. His brow is as crumpled as his mother's was, and he presses my hand to his forehead. I didn't realize they'd be there. Hey, I say, pulling my hand away from him. The regret in his voice unnerves me. It's not your fault. Raph shakes his head as if he's sick to his stomach. I shouldn't have left you alone. That he would be so worried about me is unexpected, but I can't deny the way my chest tightens hearing the concern in his voice. I don't need watching over, I tell him. This is my home. It is not your place to look after me. Besides, I continue, my tone teasing. I push his arm playfully, wincing at the movement, but I prefer it to the regret and self-loathing in his eyes. I'm clearly capable enough, and it's better it was me rather than one of the elderly. Or Violet. I snort. Raph's unforgiving gaze narrows on me. The proximity of him, the pain in his eyes, it all feels like too much. Seriously, stop. You're making me uncomfortable, I tell him. There's no way any of us could have known that would happen. Raph tries to smile at that, but can barely manage it, and I let him rest his forehead against my hand again as he takes a deep breath. You didn't look like you were going to make it. A shadow falls over us from the doorway, and I expect to see my father. But it's Eric. He glances between Raph and me. There is no scowl on his face like usual, and I'm not prepared for the worry shadowing his eyes and furrowing his brow. Raph lets go of my hand and rises to his feet. Your father's on his way, and I'll tell Link you're awake, he says. I nod, uncertain what else to do as I wait with bated breath for Eric and him to have some sort of heated exchange. But Raph doesn't even look at Eric as he brushes by him and out the door, like he didn't see him there at all. My surprise is quickly forgotten when I meet Eric's gaze. Hey, I whisper, dumbly, fidgeting with my rabbit skin blanket. The shift in the air is palpable. Eric hesitates a second longer before stepping closer. He stops at the chair closest to me and rests his hand on the back as he peers down at my palate. Eric scours my beaten-up body, and I'm keenly aware we're alone. But there's something in his eyes that calms my heartbeat instead of amplifying it. How are you feeling? Those 4 words are a soft rumble, and a lick of nerves ignites in my belly. Alive? I say, only to wince as my side hitches. Eric's eyebrows knit together, but I don't give him time to pity me. I can only imagine how wild and terrifying I looked. His jaw ticks. You looked like death, he admits, not unkindly. I was scared. The gravity of Eric's voice surprises me. There's a beat of a moment as something passes between us, but it's so fleeting when I blink, it's gone. I swallow thickly. I was scared too, I confess, brushing my fingertips over the soft rabbit skin. As Eric's gaze lingers on my wrapped shoulder, I'm acutely aware of how naked I am beneath my blanket, and I clear my throat. So, you tracked them south? His grip tightens on the back of the chair, and he nods. There were 3 sets of footprints coming into the valley. I frown. From the city? Eric's eyes darken and fix on Raph's scabbard, hanging on the wall with my father's. He stares at it for so long, I grow restless. I think they were raiders, Samara, he finally says, running his hand over his shorn hair. Raiders? I try to shake my head, but cringe instead as my shoulder pulls, tender and tight. Squeezing my eyes shut, I blow out a steadying breath before I can bring myself to meet Eric's gaze again. There's a flash of concern in his eyes. What makes you say that? I say. They didn't even fight like raiders. They were unorganized and alone. They were different. I imagine them standing in front of me, their tanned skin and dark hair matted from being unwashed. They had very little and were living off our land, not like raiders would do. I don't know, he says curtly, but if they weren't waiting for something, if they weren't watching for someone or hiding out, why not come into the village? Because a raider ship is anchored in the cove? I tell him. I wouldn't venture into a village of raiders, would you? Eric glowers with indecision. Have you asked my father about it? He shakes his head, but the way he's focused on me, as if he's considering something, I get the sense there's something more Eric isn't telling me. I'm about to press him for it, when I realize why he might hold back. Raph. Eric doesn't trust him, and knowing Raph and I are friends, that my father is close with him, that means Eric isn't likely to trust me either. They didn't know who I was, I explain, offering him all the reassurance I can. When they learned my father was the captain, they were intrigued, so they couldn't have been his men. It makes no sense. I can't explain it, Samara. It's just a feeling I have. But with it being storm season, I can't find out more. He stares at me, unblinking. I thought you should know, in case you hear or see something. I won't, I tell him, more defensively than I intend. My father isn't someone I ever thought I would feel the need to defend, but I know Eric's doubts are misplaced. But, I tell him, if I do happen to learn something, I'll let you know. The porch creaks as my father steps into the doorway. He and Eric exchange a look, and when Eric turns to leave, I feel a tug in my chest. Wait, Eric? He looks at me over his shoulder, his ever-present frown reliably in place again. Thank you for bringing me home. His eyes shift quickly over me before he nods and walks out the door. My father doesn't notice the awkwardness between Eric and me, though. He's too busy taking in the sight of me. His relief is a strange mask I've never seen on him before, and his eyes only shift to mine for a fleeting moment before he glances around the cottage. "Can I get you something?" he asks. I tell myself I prefer his averted gaze to any sympathy I might see in his eyes. It's only when I don't answer him that he's forced to look at me again. "No, thank you." He steps closer, resting his hands on his hips as he glances at the pallet and water bowl beside me. He looks exhausted. "There's a break in the storm. We've been finishing the barn." His cheek is dirty, and his braided hair is loose and days old. I nod. "Good." He glances at me again. "Are you certain there's nothing you need?" "Yes. It was nice of Isa to help take care of me," I tell him, wondering if he's as surprised as I am. "She was worried about you. We all were." I weigh my father's words and the tone of his voice. Eric's concerns about the squatters linger in the back of my mind. "Did you see them?" I ask. "The bodies, I mean." "I did." My father pours himself a mug of water from the pitcher on the table. "Did you recognize any of them?" "You mean what was left of them?" he asks offhandedly, then frowns. "No. Why would I?" "They didn't look like they were from here." His eyes rest on me briefly before I hear a few other voices, and my father's attention shifts to the door. Brom, Link, and Violet file inside. Despite my certainty that the 3 drifters weren't my father's men, I can't help but wonder who he thinks they might have been. But since he's ensured I'm well enough, my father seems all too relieved by the interruption and can't get out of the cottage fast enough. "I'll leave you to your friends. Brom," he says, nodding to the healer. "Let me know if you need anything more." "Yes, Abraham, of course." His kind green eyes crinkle in the corners as he dips his chin. Satisfied, my father excuses himself with a glance in my direction. I grit my teeth as the back of my throat burns, because suddenly, Eric's concern feels entirely too possible. I wonder if it's not my face that offends my father, but something else that weighs on him. Something he's hiding. Chapter 26. I wake up shivering on the pallet by the hearth. There's pattering rain on the roof and a crackling fire, which lights the room in the dark of night, but otherwise the cottage is quiet. Isa isn't in her chair next to me, and for a moment, I think everyone might be asleep. But Raph's boots aren't by the door either, and I don't hear my father snoring above. Whatever the hour, I'm alone. After 4 days of lying here, I should be used to it, but I'm already restless from being cooped up indoors. The fact that it's pouring rain and I'd likely be stuck inside because of the storm anyway lessens the blow, but only slightly. The rainstorm has done little to keep the others inside. I'm sure they've all kept their distance so I can rest, but a distraction from the pain would be a reprieve. I'm not sure where Raph has been, but after seeing the misplaced guilt in his eyes when he first saw me, I imagine that's what's keeping him away. My father continues to tend to ship duties and meet with Gil to discuss his voyage home, though I'm not sure how many villagers will return with him, especially after what happened in the orchard. My side spasms with pain as I inch myself up to sitting, and I bite back a curse. At least my head feels better, and though my neck, shoulder, and side hurt like hellfire when I move the wrong way, my body as a whole no longer feels like it's been pummeled. Since my right shoulder will protest, I use my left arm to reach for the poker to stoke the dwindling fire, instantly regretting it. The weight of the iron tugs at my mended side, but I decide shivering in the dying heat will be worse in the long run. It's only moments before the iron is too heavy in my grasp, and as I drop the poker, voices meet my ears. They are muffled by the rain and barely audible, but I can hear Raph's bitter laughter, which I've noticed he reserves for heated conversations with his mother. I strain to listen, but my effort is all for naught against the sound of the storm, and when the door opens, it's only Isa standing in the threshold. The rain pelts the ground behind her. When she sees I'm sitting up, her eyes light with surprise. "You're awake," she breathes, and quickly shuts the door behind her. "I got chilly." Isa removes her cloak and hangs it by the door. Her shoes and the hem of her skirt are muddy, and I wonder where she's been in this weather. Where's my father and Raph? She smooths her hair back out of her face, damp from the rain, and comes to hold her hands to the fire. Your father is in the longhouse with Gil and Andrik, she says with the sharpness I've grown used to. Though Issa's been the most constant person in my life the past 4 days, and she's shown me a great kindness by helping me, she's still Issa. Cagey and closed off, even with the sparkle of motherly concern I've glimpsed in her a time or two. The moment she seems to realize her compassion is showing, she forces it away. And Raph? I prompt. She glances at me. I don't know, she admits. Her frown deepens as she tends to the fire. I barely recognize him anymore. The softness of her voice somehow sounds like a growl, but I'm not entirely surprised. Their terse single-word remarks and hard expressions have only worsened, and I'm beginning to wonder if Issa learned about Hector, and as Raph feared, she doesn't approve. Issa puts another log on the fire, and as it begins to blaze once more, sending warm chills over my skin, I close my eyes and lift my face to its heat. I'll make us something to eat, Issa says, and rises to her feet. Then I'll take a look at your wounds. I can take care of that, I tell her. I use the bench of the table, and very carefully I rise to my feet. You're as stubborn as your father, she mutters, and pulls the onions and potatoes from the basket by the dishes. I can't sit here and do nothing forever, I tell her, but she ignores me as she brings a clean cloth and eucalyptus water over, placing them on the table for me to use. You'll have to get my shoulder, though, I amend. Please. Her eyes meet mine as she dons her apron. And, I add, I could use your help with my tunic. Her head tilts and she blinks at me. But the rest, I concede, I can do on my own. Though Issa doesn't smile, ever, amusement shimmers in her eyes as she walks over to me. In an unguarded moment, her features are soft and brightened by the fire, and I realize more and more how strikingly beautiful she is, even if it's a cruel sort of beauty, terrifying in a way. Her cool fingers brush over my skin as she takes the hem of my shirt and carefully tugs it over my head and wounded arm. Will there be anything else? She asks wryly. I guess we'll see. I flash her a crooked grin. Issa shakes her head and lights a candle on the table for additional light. Thank you, I murmur, realizing how comforting Issa's presence has been during all of this. She cleaves a potato in half, not bothering to look at me. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I tell her. I do. I'm not sure what I would do without her. There's something comforting in having a woman here with me, and whatever that something is aches deep within me, and I have to squash the burn in my throat and chest before it gets the better of me. I've forgotten what it feels like, I admit. Her chopping ceases, her hand stills, and this time I feel her eyes on me. To have a mother, I add. I unwind the used strips of cloth from my body so I don't have to look at her. I don't know why I give voice to such thoughts, but I can't help the words as they form on my tongue. I know, I say. You're not my mother. Of course you're not. But still. I clear my throat, knowing she doesn't want to have this conversation any more than I do, so I change the subject. Imagine my father trying to help me. I huff a laugh and immediately wince. That would be a sight to see. Issa huffs with amusement too, and while I don't look at her, I feel the heaviness in the air dissipate a little. There's a rap of knuckles on the door, and Issa and I look at one another. My torso is bare, save for the gauze around my shoulder and right breast. It's Link, he calls from the other side. Issa looks at me, and I nod for her to let him in as I gather my tunic against me. Issa opens the door, and the fire flickers as a gust of wind whips through the room. As soon as Link steps inside, his eyes land on me in a rumpled, half-dressed state, and he frowns. She insisted on tending to her own wounds, Issa mutters, and latches the door behind him. Link's head tilts with a sigh, as if he's not surprised, and he walks over to me. He removes his leather jacket, dripping from the rain, and drapes it across the table. His black hair hangs in his eyes, and the water droplets on his jaw glisten in the glow of the room. "I'll help you," he grumbles and sits on the bench beside me. Though I have nothing to hide from Link, knowing he's seen all of me before, I hold my shirt to my chest as he takes in the stitched wound on my side. Link assesses my face next. His eyes are black and sparkling like obsidian when they lock with mine. There is no heat in them, nor do I feel the awkwardness I might have expected from us drifting further apart. Instead, Issa, Link, and I fall into a companionable silence as Link scoots the bowl of water closer to clean my healing flesh. Craning my neck as much as I dare, I stare down at it. The wound doesn't look nearly as red and angry as it feels, which I assume is a good thing. "Are you going stir-crazy yet?" Link asks, his eyes flashing to me as he dips a clean cloth in the eucalyptus water. You know me so well. A grin tugs at the corner of his mouth, and he dabs the cloth on my skin, just as carefully as he did the day I tried to cut my mother's resemblance from my face. Though Link has seemed miles away this past year, having him sit here beside me now makes it almost feel as if nothing has changed at all. "Can you do me a favor?" he finally says, dropping the wet cloth on the table. I grin. As I sit here being tended to by you, I think I have to say yes. I tease. A sad sort of smile flashes across Link's face, and he averts his gaze. "Listen to Issa and Brahm, and take care of yourself." I watch him, confused. "I will." "I mean it, Samara." That he uses my full name gives me pause. "I need you to heal up so you can attend my wedding in 2 weeks." Though my smile falters, it's not because I am surprised or sad, so much as hit with the reality of our situation all over again. So it's finally happening then, I muse. Link's eyes shift from my mouth to my eyes, narrowing slightly as he unravels a clean strip of cloth. "I just thought that I would change my mind." He snaps, as if I've offended him. "No," I say carefully, "but with my father showing up, a dozen raiders staying here, and with all the storms, I wasn't sure what you would do, is all." "Life is not easy, Mar," he says, and exhales a tired breath. "What happened to you is only a reminder of that." I'm not certain what I have to do with it, so I wait for him to continue. "I don't want to postpone my life, waiting for the timing to be right, because it never will be. I know you aren't Violet's biggest fan, but I love her, and she loves me. Her parents have taken me in like their own, and it's time to make it official." He's pensive as he waits for my protest, or for me to say something against him. "I have no doubt Violet loves you, Link. I've known it from the first time I saw you together." I smile, if a bit sadly. I knew it was only a matter of time. Issa moves around behind us, tending to her cooking, but it's impossible for her not to hear. Link carefully bandages my side. "Hey, Link," I say softly, but we both startle and glance at the door as it creaks open. "I need rabbit from the smokehouse," Issa explains, then shuts the door behind her. I'm not sure if it's true, but I appreciate her giving us a moment alone together. Link ties the end of the cloth before his eyes meet mine. "Will you promise me something?" He dips his chin without hesitation, and I feel a sense of relief in that. "You said yourself, Violet and I are not the best of friends. Will you—" I'm not sure how to tell him what fills my stomach with knots is the thought of losing him more than I already have. "Please don't disappear completely," I whisper, because I don't know what I would do without him. Even if things are different now. Link reaches out and cups my cheek in his warm palm. "You will always be my best friend, Mar. Not even Violet changes that." I don't know if it's the pent-up restlessness of the days past, or the onslaught of far too many emotions since my father's arrival, but Link's features blur, and holding his promise so close it hurts, I close my eyes to quell the tears. After a few moments collecting myself, I finally open my eyes and wipe the moisture from my cheek. Link's eyes shimmer in the firelight, but are filled with relief. The air between us feels lighter than it has in so long, and I exhale what's left of the tension in my chest. So much is changing, I think aloud, and Link's hand moves to the bandage on my neck. Yes, it is. You're losing your edge, he teases, taking my mangled body in. I snort a laugh, but it's then I feel the thickness in my throat again. I was scared, Link. I admit. I see the faces of the men again. There was something in their eyes. A recognition, I think. Or a hatred, maybe. Once they knew my father was the captain, their intentions shifted. I could feel it in every fiber. I lick my bottom lip, no longer swollen, but tender all the same. What does that mean? Link drops his hand, his expression contemptuous. Maybe your father is more infamous than we realized. Not everyone appreciates change, and anyone familiar with him would know who was here once they saw the ship. I nod, knowing it's highly possible they could be men who seek to undo what my father has worked for. Eric thinks they were raiders, I admit. He thinks they are my father's men, or I don't know. Link scratches his jaw. You saw them. What do you think? I shake my head, regretting it when the skin on my neck pulls and I wince. I might not know my father well anymore, or perhaps I never really did, but it makes no sense that they would be his men, or Raph's, which I think Eric was implying. Then raiders of a different sort, who want revenge against your father, he reiterates. As their faces flash to mind again, I think of their camp. It was as though they were waiting for something. I think you're right. Then we must be even more careful. Link thinks aloud. You more than anyone. And you should talk to your father. Warn him and maybe Raph. He'll listen to you, especially if there could be more of them out there. I purse my lips. What are the odds it was only 3 angry men? I ask, spiraling at the thought of a camp full of revenge-driven raiders somewhere waiting out the storms. Link holds my gaze for a few heartbeats. Low. And it turns my stomach sour that all of our people could be in more danger than ever because of my father's arrival. We'll figure it out, Link says, reassuring me as he always does. And there's nothing you can do about it now, so don't get any ideas. I told you, I need you at my wedding. You better not get yourself killed before then, or I'll never forgive you. I take Link's hand in mine and bring it to my lips, sealing my words with a kiss. I won't. I promise. Chapter 27. There's nothing like a constant state of idleness to make a person's mind wander. 4 days was hard enough, but after an entire week, I can barely stand to sit still a second longer. I need to fill my day with something. So I set to washing and hanging my dirty clothes and bedding. Then I muck the barn, slowly and carefully, and it takes a number of grimaces and deep breaths before I can finish. Amidst my grumbles and groans, all I can think about is how work has consumed my life, until now, and as a result, I have exactly one friend, Link. And I'm desperate for someone other than Issa to talk to. Near the end of the day, when my body aches from too much movement, no matter how careful I've been, I decide a walk to find Link is in order. I'll even settle for a stilted conversation with Violet if I have to. Ignoring the drizzling rain, I head into the village. The hollow clank of driftwood and tinkling of sea glass rides the breeze as I head toward the alehouse. Maybe that's where I'll end up. It's as good a place as any. It's nearly time for the torches to be lit, but with the gray afternoon darkening and the rain threatening to fall, everyone will be heading inside soon. I've only passed a few cottages when Wyatt steps into the path, his back to me as he trudges toward the center of the village with a sack of wool slung over each shoulder. His pants are caked with mud, and I can tell he's been helping Tilly shear the sheep by the wool-covered apron gripped between his fingers. The apron slips from his hand and falls into the mud. I got it, I tell him as he curses. I ignore the pinch in my side as I bend down. It's leather and surprisingly heavy. Thanks. Wyatt zeroes in on the healing bruise on my face before the bandage on my neck steals his attention. His green eyes soften and gleam with sympathy. Sympathy I don't need, or want, for that matter. I'll carry it for you, I tell him, and start walking again. You're going to Violet's? Wyatt nods and falls into step beside me. I'm helping since her father's getting worse and Link's busy. He explains. Tilly wants to get a batch of wool shorn and drying before the next storm. That's nice of you. Wyatt is a nice guy, still idyllic and childlike in some ways, which I like about him. But like my relationship with everyone else, we've never been close. You look like you're feeling better, he says, our footsteps squishing in the mud in tandem. Yes, bored out of my mind, but better. I feel his eyes on me as we pass a few more cottages. You really fought off 3 men? He says, incredulous. A laugh bubbles out of me. Not very well. Wyatt smirks, and his hair hangs in red, wet tendrils in his eyes. Still, that's impressive. There's genuine respect in his voice, and finally I meet Wyatt's gaze. Thanks. I blink a water drop from my lashes as Tilly's barn, where she washes and dries the wool, comes into view. I think most people would do whatever they can to survive. True, Wyatt says with a bob of his head, but that doesn't mean they actually would survive. I mean, you and Eric have always been similar like that. I study Wyatt's profile. How do you mean? We stop under the eave of Tilly's barn, and Wyatt slings the sacks off his shoulders, letting them drop to the ground with a thud. We might have both lost our mothers on Desolation Day, but I would be dead too if it weren't for Eric. He saved me when I couldn't save myself. He always has. Wyatt mutters the last part and runs his fingers through his damp hair. He reaches for the barn door. Is that why you two are so close? It's more of a realization than a question as I grasp just how much Desolation Day changed all of us in irreparable ways. It's why Eric is so attentive to Wyatt. He'd lost his father to the lightning storms shortly after that. He pauses. I guess. All Wyatt has now is his grandfather and Eric. During our scavenging trips to the sunken city, they are always teamed up. Eric sees to that. When repairs need to be made to Wyatt's cottage, Eric is always there to help. And the amount of times I've watched Wyatt return with Eric in his fishing boat over the years is countless. It's only then I realized that Eric even forgets to scowl as much when Wyatt's around. As soon as the door opens, Tilly huffs as if she's been rushing. Her graying hair is piled on top of her head, and her cheeks are red. I can see why Link helps so much, knowing she and Violet have to do everything on their own with Elliot's poor health. Tilly glances between us in surprise. I wasn't expecting 2 of you, she says, and gestures for me to come in. Unfortunately, I start thinking of my side and shoulder. I'm not much help. I was just leaving. Oh, yes, of course. She looks at me kindly and blows a strand of hair out of her face. I'm about to ask if Link is around when she nods toward the apothecary down the road. Link helped get Elliot to Brom. You can head that way if you like. I shake my head, not wanting to burden them as they hustle between storms. That's okay. Sorry I can't help. I offer her the apron. That's Eric's, actually, Wyatt says, lugging one of the sacks into the barn. Tilly drags in the other and opens it to submerge the wool into a large tub. Do you mind taking it to him? Wyatt dumps the other sack out, already consumed with his work. That he's helping Tilly when he doesn't have to makes my heart swell with affection for him. Yeah, sure. I'll take it to him. I nod and turn to leave. Thanks, Amara, Wyatt calls. Of course. I say it like seeking out Eric is totally normal and give Wyatt a quick wave as I close the door. Heading for Eric's cottage on the other side of the village, I decide another thank you for carrying me home the other day wouldn't hurt, so I pick up the pace. As his cottage comes into view, I realize how dismal it is, boarded up in areas with no personal touches. No wind chimes or wreaths, or even chairs flanking the doorway for evening or morning musings. Old tanning tools are stacked against a dilapidated fence, the metal pieces rusted, and the wood handles rotted from all the rain. They are as forgotten as their home looks. It's always been this way, and I wonder why Eric has never taken the time to do more than patch it up, especially when he takes such care with Wyatt's place. I lift my hand to knock on the door when I hear voices on the other side. Eat something. There's a clank and what sounds like the scraping of chair legs, and I lean against the door to listen. I said, Eric grinds out, stop drinking and eat something. I clench the apron tighter in my hand, the leather creaking in my grip as I imagine Eric looming over his father, manhandling him into the chair like I've seen him do before. Not hungry. Eat anyway, Eric says, exasperated, and I can tell his patience is thinning. It dawns on me that Eric is too busy working and caretaking to worry about the appearance of their cottage, and that he has to do it all alone makes me angry. What hold does his father have over him that Eric is still so tolerant, especially after the headache Rory's been all these years? I imagine life with a drunk father who's barely coherent half of the time is similar to a life without much of one at all, maybe worse. Please eat, Pop. You need something in your stomach. Eric acts like nothing can hurt him, but I hear the fatigue in his voice, the earnest plea, and I rest my forehead against the door. You're always worrying about me, just like your mother. Rory's voice cracks before he continues. You're just like her, you know? Just as grouchy and just as fussy when it comes to me, at least. It's easy to forget Eric was only a boy once. And again, I remember the day our mothers were taken from us. Only he was there to see it, while I witnessed the aftermath. He's kept to himself a lot ever since. Rory must finally sit down because the chair scrapes on the floorboards again, and I hear him grunt. Soup's cold, he mutters. It was warm when I set it there. Next time, don't fight me so much. It's an intrusion to listen, and yet the more I glean of the real Eric, the more I want to know. But unwilling to lurk any longer, I finally knock on the door. Visitors? Rory chirps. Eat, Eric tells him. It's only Wyatt. I'll get the door. My heartbeat quickens as I hear his footsteps on the other side before it opens. Eric's furrowed brow shoots up in surprise before his eyes shift over me, his gaze lingering on my bandaged neck. What are you doing here? His tone isn't cruel, so much as surprised, and he glances over his shoulder to ensure his father is still eating before he steps outside. I shuffle backward, and he closes the door behind him. I offer Eric the apron. From Wyatt, he asked me to return it for him. I brush off bits of wool and a piece of mud from when it fell, but it only smears on the leather. Here. Eric takes it, if a little slowly, but his eyes don't leave me. Why are you the one bringing it to me? I try not to be offended by his question. Because he's helping Tilly. I was out walking around, and I blink at him. I wanted to thank you again for helping me the other day. With a gaze that could smelt metal, Eric nods, slowly. You're welcome. He stares at me. I stare at him. His eyes shift over my face and his jaw clenches. I'm not sure why I don't turn to leave, but something keeps me in place, searching Eric's face for understanding. I've always known Eric, so why do I feel like I've only just met him or seen him after all this time? What's changed? The door jostles and flies open, and Rory leans out, staring at us. His glassy eyes widen, and a smirk fills his face. It's you! Come on, Eric says, placing his hands on his father's shoulders. Back in the house. Samara was just leaving. He forces Rory to spin around, and I take a step into the road. Rory frowns and protests as Eric jostles him inside, but Eric doesn't relent. I turn to leave, feeling grossly out of place again, when Eric calls my name. I glance back at him. Thanks, he says, lifting the apron. I nod, and Eric closes the door, locking Rory's protest inside with him. I'm not sure how many moments I stare at the door, but I hear Rory's grumbling until he must sit down to his soup again. Silently, I curse Rory. What more might Eric and I have said if he hadn't interrupted? What more might I have gleaned? Whatever has shifted between us, it feels as if Eric and I found a truce of sorts, or maybe a mutual respect. I don't know what it is, but as the heat in my cheeks burns hotter, I decide to head to the alehouse to ponder it over a mug of ale. Chapter 28. After nearly 2 weeks, I can't take the confining walls of the cottage or leisurely strolls through the village any longer. I'm beyond stir-crazy and convince Raph to go with Link, the guys, and me on a hunting trip between storms. A break in the torrential rain brings a reprieve for both the animals and us, and it's our last chance to hunt fresh game for Link's marriage celebration. Eric's presence rankles him, but Raph seems relieved to get out as much as the rest of us and doesn't protest much. "Stop fidgeting," Raph murmurs, eyes fixed on the woods, watching for movement. While Eric, Wyatt, Kenneth, and Link are off tracking a herd of deer, Raph and I wait in a cluster of oak trees for boar to fill the raiders' larder. I realize I'm tapping my fingers on the uprooted oak we're hiding behind. I can't help it. You won't let me do anything. "You thought any of us would actually let you hunt today?" he says, skeptical. "You're the worst sick person I've ever met." "You're the one who reopened that gash I put in your side. Twice. Before it finally started to heal." Raph doesn't bother contradicting me because he knows he's just as stubborn as I am. Even if he's been in rare form since my orchard incident, he's been my constant companion, teaching me chess and liar's dice and telling me stories of his childhood adventures with Hector. I eye the excess of fallen acorns on the ground, which ensures the boar will return nearly every day to dig them up and gorge on. "What sort of animals do you have in Oaxaca?" I ask, suddenly curious. "We have iguanas and spotted cats, smaller but just as terrifying as the mountain lion you have here. Our birds are more colorful, and we have blossoms all year long." "I would love to see them," I say wistfully, and Raph looks at me. I hold up my hand. "Someday," I clarify. I imagine the trees in the forests, so close together you can't even see through them, and leaves towering above in a verdant canopy. We wait in silence a little while longer, and I can barely stand it. Hunting, I've decided, is something I'll never be patient enough for or good at. Maybe I should find more acorns to put over there. Raph snorts. "You have to give it time. That's part of hunting, you know." I roll my eyes and rest my forehead on the log, inhaling the damp earth beneath us. "Have you ever eaten an acorn?" Raph asks. When I look at him, he's staring at the surplus of them beneath the oak trees. "Yes, well, not right off the ground, but we roast them, and it's how we make our bread." His eyes pop with surprise. "Why? What do you do with them in Oaxaca?" He shakes his head. "Honestly, I don't know. There are oak forests in some places, but it's not like here, where that's all you really see." "Then what do the boar eat where you live? I mean, you still hunt there, don't you?" Raph shrugs. "I don't have a reason to when I'm home. There are people who cook for us," he adds reluctantly. I frown. "You have slaves," I realize. I assumed as much, but it's easy to forget how different our worlds are the longer the raiders stay with us. Raph's eyes harden and meet mine. "They are servants, not slaves." "Is there a difference?" Raph looks away, and I feel a spike of anger toward him, even if I know it's not fair. His life is very different from mine, and little of it has ever been in his control. "Another reason I cannot go to Oaxaca," I tell him. "I would not be able to live the way you do, the way my father does. At least in Ebonpeak, we are all equal." "And here you are all dying," he says curtly. "Even your father sees that, which is why he will never stay, even if it's best." Raph glances at me, exhaling his frustration. "He knows you have to work for change, that you have to take what you want." Isn't that what got us in this mess to begin with? People taking what they want? Raph scratches his stubbled jaw and sighs as if the weight of the world rests on his shoulders. "I just mean..." There's movement in the trees, and we both crouch lower. "There," he breathes, as a mother and 2 piglets come into view. "You can't shoot her," I tell him. Raph glares at me. "Why not?" "Because the babies will die if you kill the sow, and we need them to grow up so we can eat them later." His ignorance is yet another reminder of how detached Raph is from my reality. Displeased, Raph watches as the mother uses her tusks and snout to dig in the soft earth, her tail wagging as she snorts to her piglets, which never leave her side. I almost hate to think one day we'll kill them for food. Almost. If we're not hunting them, we might as well head back. Raph grumbles, and he rises to his feet. The piglets squeal in surprise and disperse into the trees, while their mother snorts, eyeing us with indecision before she decides to run with her babies, rather than to charge us. Raph straightens, his black curls falling away from his face. It's getting late anyway. There's no point in waiting for a male to come through. He offers me his hand, and carefully he helps me to my feet. Raph brushes the twigs from my vest and arms, attentive in a way I think a brother might be to a sister, and I smile. Is that what he is now? Never having one before, I can't help but wonder. Raph hands me the shortest tether of rabbits to hang over my good shoulder, and takes the larger one, caught and killed with his trap, and we head back to the wagon. The sun beams from between clouds, and I lift my face toward it. I forget how much I miss it during storm season, I muse, the way the sun feels on my skin. I miss sweating under its blaze. It is strange here, Raph muses, the way it feels warm, but the sky is so menacing. In Oaxaca, the sun is out most of the year, and it's far hotter than it is here. I nod. Gil says it's the heat and the storm clouds colliding that makes the lightning so brutal. Raph's eyes shift over the path as we turn a slight bend. He's like a real father to you, isn't he? I laugh. More so than Abraham, yes. And that's not strange for you. I look at him. As if I've had a choice, I mutter, still, why would it be strange? Raph looks at me askance. Because he is Link's father, and you and Link have a strange relationship? Our relationship is not strange, I counter, more defensively than necessary. But it is complicated, I'll give you that. I step over a fallen log, feeling only a slight tinge in my side at the movement. You love him. I look at Raph, surprised by his question, though I'm not entirely sure why. I'm sure many people wonder what's between Link and me. Or maybe everyone's just used to us. Link and Samara, friends as far back as anyone can remember. It's just that, Raph continues, I can't tell how you two feel about one another. It's as if he's avoiding you at times, but then I see you together, and you seem so natural. The sincerity in Raph's voice seems almost protective in a way that makes me smile. Link is the love of my life, I admit. Well, I thought he was. He's been my best friend forever. When my mother died and my father left, I thought I would die of a broken heart. But he was there for me in a way no one was. But now he's getting married to Violet? I nod. I always thought Link was mine, but I'm beginning to realize he isn't. He's just all I've ever really known. Perhaps the feelings I had for him were real in the moment, but now I see it differently. How? A dependence on him I don't want anymore, I guess. I don't think I resented Violet as much as I feared her taking away my best friend, my only friend. Probably the way you would feel if Hector hung out with the guys more than with you. I elbow him with a smile, but Raph ignores me. And you don't feel that way now? I shake my head. No, I might not have trusted you at first, but I haven't felt alone since you arrived either. And that brings me comfort. Like Link isn't everything. I think it's shock that flashes in Raph's eyes before he looks away. I'm not sure what I have said wrong, but I don't have to think too long about it before he clears his throat. I have to admit, he starts, as Fergus and the wagon come into view. You aren't what I expected. I snort. Is that a good thing? Raph's dark lashes brush his lowered brows as he scrutinizes me. For so long, I squirm inwardly and bite my cheek. I don't know, he finally says. His answer surprises me, and that quiet, contemplative look that I've seen on him lately falls back into place as he turns for the wagon. I reach for his arm. Raph? His eyes meet mine. Is everything okay? There's something guarded in his eyes that worries me, and he looks me up and down. Why? I nod in the direction of the village. Hector didn't come with us today, and you and your mother have been arguing so much. I shake my head with a shrug, uncertain what else to say. The truth is, I've known Raph for weeks, and he continues to surprise me. But deep down, I get the feeling this isn't just a quirk of his. He seems tortured. Raph stares toward home, his jaw working beneath his dark scruff. Do you ever feel like your life isn't your own, Samara? He asks, and we fall into step again. Always, I confess, especially lately. Fergus lifts his drooping head as he hears us approaching. My mother has always told me I have to take what I want in this life. Raph explains, and there's an unexpected longing in his voice that piques my curiosity. And yet, she is the one who makes me feel trapped. This is about your mother and Hector, then, I realize, and I can't help but feel sorry for Raph and what effect Issa has had on their relationship. Raph looks like he might say more, but his eyes shift over me in a way they never have before, and he seems to think better of it. Suddenly, his contagious grin returns, the one I haven't seen in days, and my heart flutters a little. He reaches up to me, brushing his thumb over the scars on my cheek tenderly. I have spent my life trying to be strong, he says, but you have so much strength in you, more than even your father knows, I think. His admiration dwindles as his eyes shadow. You would never struggle with indecision, and I... Footsteps crunch on the trail, but I don't look away from Raph. His gaze is haunted and resolved in a way that scares me, even if I don't understand it. Raph, I start, determined to know what's troubling him. A throat clears, and I glance over my shoulder to find Link, Wyatt, Kenneth, and Eric staring at us. Raph drops his hand, and the moment between us is chased away by the angry glare on Eric's face and the confusion on Link's. Are we interrupting something? Link says in a tone that's not angry so much as concerned. No, I say. Always. Raph chuckles and lays his rabbit tether in the wagon bed. I roll my eyes, ignoring his snark, and nod to the two-pronged buck draped over Link's shoulder as he shrugs it onto the wagon. Nice catch. Eric drops his six-pronged buck onto the wagon beside it, making the whole thing shudder. Rabbits? Kenneth says with a laugh, eyeing our meager findings. What of it? I ask him. Samara has a soft spot for the piglets, Raph explains. Otherwise, we would have had boar too. Eric and Wyatt say nothing as they unload the trap slung over Wyatt's shoulders. I watch them with a new appreciation as they work in tandem beside one another. A cacophony of sighs and grumbles fills the air as the group drinks from their canteens and rolls their shoulders from a long day of hunting. I say we've earned a night in the alehouse, Kenneth says, especially since after tomorrow, you're going to be a married man, Link. Returning home drunk as a skunk. Sure, Violet will love that. All the more reason to spend the night with the guys, Raph says merrily. I'll get the men together, and we'll show you how to send off your single days the way we do it back home. Nah, come on, Raph goads. Don't you want to live a little? He said he doesn't want to. Eric grinds out. He's the last person I would have expected to come to Link's aid, but knowing his distrust in Raph, I'm not entirely surprised. What's your problem with me, big guy? Raph says, straightening his shoulders. I don't like the confrontation in his voice, or the nickname, uttered with a yearning for what sounds like a fight. You glare at me like you've got something to say. You have been for weeks, and yet nothing. I don't like you, Eric replies all too eagerly, and I don't trust you. Eric, stop. I bite out. Don't do this now. I don't really care if you trust me, Raph says, stepping past me as if I'm not even there. I glare at Link, willing him to step in and do something. I know you don't, Eric sneers. You've got free rein here. You have Abraham and Samara wrapped around your finger, but... Eric, stop, My words are hard, cold, demanding. I'm serious. I've been watching you. He continues. Raph takes a step closer, and they're nearly chest to chest. Eric is broader and stronger, but Raph is itching for a fight, and both men would come out a bloody mess. Really? And what do you see, big guy? Eric sneers at the moniker. I know you sneak out in the middle of the night when everyone is sleeping, he says, and the blood drains from my face as I realize Eric might actually know Raph's secret and give something away out of pure spite. Raph's glower twitches slightly. Ah. Eric's eyes widen, and I'm not sure I've ever seen him look so menacing and self-satisfied, even while sparring with me. You weren't expecting that, were you, Raph? It's none of your business where I go, he retorts, and there's something murderous in Raph's voice that makes my fingers curl into my palm. I see Raph's agitated fear for what it really is, protectiveness over Hector. You'd like to think that, wouldn't you? Eric jeers and looks Raph up and down. It's not bad enough you show up out of nowhere, claiming to be an ally, which itself is a joke. But now you're flirting with Samara and trying to be everyone's friend? We don't buy it. Not everyone's friend, Raph says snidely. Eric's laugh is humorless. Huh. Funny how those squatters arrived around the time you did. Eric! I growl again, and finally his angry gaze meets mine, a glare for a glare. You might not be able to see what he truly is in that enamored haze he has you in, Samara, but the rest of us do. He glares at Raph again. So I ask you again, what are you hiding, Raider? What is it you don't want us to see? Raph's jaw ticks, and I hate that his body is as coiled and ready to strike as Eric's is. I try to push them apart, but it pulls at my healing shoulder and I wince. Stop it! I tell them, and look to Link for help, but he doesn't step in. I don't know if it's because he agrees with Eric or if he just doesn't want to get in the middle of it, which pisses me off even more. Do you like making enemies? Raph snarls. Because when you accuse me, you accuse us all. Is that a threat? You bet your ass it is. I push Eric's massive body back. He barely budges, and my side twinges. I doubt I reopened any of my wounds, but my blood is roiling so fiercely, I don't much care if I did. Both of you, stop. You're being idiots. I glare pointedly at Eric. You're picking a fight and causing a scene, and you have no idea what you're talking about. And Eric is right. Raph is hiding plenty, but none of it is what he thinks it is, nor is it any of his business. Leave him alone, I demand. Eric's nostrils flare as he forces his attention from Raph to me, and his eyes linger on my features. I see something inexplicable cross his face, something that looks like a dangerous longing, which makes no sense, because even if Eric doesn't hate me anymore, he doesn't like me either. Not like that. But as my cheeks flare with warmth, and I suddenly wonder, the look in Eric's eyes is gone. His scowl deepens, and he turns, pounding his fists into the side of the wagon, making Fergus jump. With his hands clenched at his sides, Eric stalks down the path, back toward the oak grove. Dick, Raph mutters, and I whirl around to face him. Really? I seethe. What? He egged me on. I roll my eyes and look at Link. Thanks for the help. Link lifts his shoulder. What did you want me to say? I'm just as curious as Eric. His eyes meet Raph's. Wyatt turns to follow Eric, and I clasp his shoulder, fuming at the testosterone I'm surrounded by. I'll go, I say, and ask myself why I should even bother. That look. I don't know what I saw in his eyes, but I can't unsee it. I can't unfeel the hope that I saw jealousy. I have to know. Samara, don't. I glare at Raph, warning him away from me. Get everything ready to go, I tell him. We have a wedding to get back for. Disappointed by all of them, I shake my head and march after Eric. I get that Eric is angry at me half of the time, but his hatred of Raph is going to cause more conflict than I can deal with on top of everything else right now, especially if Link is right and the men from the orchard were coming here to seek revenge on my father. When I march into the oak grove, Eric is pacing back and forth, running one hand over his head. The other one drips with blood. When he hears my footsteps, his glare hardens on me. "Go away, Samara." "No," I snap and stalk over to him. "I know you don't trust Raph. Hell, I didn't trust him either." He scoffs. "I didn't. But things change, Eric." "Yeah? What's changed since you were attacked by those men? The fact that Raph never leaves your side? That you're too busy batting your eyelashes at him to heed my warning?" "It's not like that with Raph." "Lie to yourself all you want, Samara, but I don't trust any of them. It's all too convenient." "Convenient?" "Eric, none of this is convenient, but you'll never trust anyone if you don't give us a chance." "Us?" His head snaps to me. I'm not entirely sure what I meant by that, so I say nothing. Pursing his lips, he looks away. "Look," I start again. "I don't blame you for not trusting them. It goes against everything we've known our entire lives. I get it, more than you know. My own father is at the helm of this. How do you think that makes me feel? But Raph..." The truth is poised at the tip of my tongue, yet I can't bring myself to tell Eric a secret that's not mine to tell. I know what he's hiding, I admit. That earns me an eye twitch. I know we aren't friends, Eric, that we can barely stand each other most of the time. But please, just trust me on this. My words are a plea, because I don't have it in me to be a hard ass, not when it's all so complicated and confusing. Please, because whoever you think those men in the orchard were, they have nothing to do with Raph, and I hesitate to say it. Is this even about Raph? Because it seems like there's something else. Eric looks away and runs his hand over his shorn brown hair. The crimson on his knuckles glistens in the sunlight, and I reach for it. "Your bleed..." "Don't," he says, pulling his arm back with gritted teeth. A flare of resentment hardens inside me. But when I look at him, his eyes are closed, his jaw working so hard I think he might break at any moment. Whatever anger rages inside of him frightens me, and I don't dare speak. Without sparing me another look, Eric leaves the grove. His open palms flex at his sides, and I wonder if we'll ever be able to find common ground. Because just when I think we might finally be friends, it feels like we're chasms apart all over again. And once more, I'm left confused and uncertain about everything. Chapter 29. Eric and Wyatt are gone, along with Eric's buck and their weapons by the time I return to the wagon. And after a long, stiltedly silent trek back to the village, Raph, Link, and Kennett go their own ways to clean their catches as well. With nothing else to do and too exhausted to mend my frustrations with the guys, I head home as well. The blow-up between Raph and Eric wasn't what I had expected when I set out to ease the restlessness I've been stewing in. Now a ball of anxiety has lodged itself in my stomach, and I can't decide if I'm more angry with Eric for probing Raph for doing nothing to put Eric's mind at ease, or Link for standing back, ready for it all to come to blows. When I arrive at the cabin, Issa is at the clothesline, taking down laundry that's been drying in the sunshine. "You're back in one piece," she muses, her tone dry. "Barely," I mutter. I can feel her eyes on me as I reach the door. When I step inside, my father is sitting at the table, poring over his ledger with a mug of ale beside him. He only spares me a glance before his attention is on his notebook again. "How was hunting? Fruitful?" he asks absently. "It was... something," I mutter, and unbuckle my long sleeves. I shrug out of them and walk over to the water pitcher to pour myself a cup. The setting sun filters through the window, pale pink in the overcast afternoon, and I wonder what weather tomorrow will bring for Link's celebration. "Did they catch anything?" I nod, chugging down my water, my mind still a torrent of frustration and exhaustion. Or maybe the heaviness is sadness because no one in my life can seem to get along. "Yes," I say, peering down at his book. I read the food supply list my father runs his finger over, noticing Raph's initials next to each of them. My father relies on him for so much, but his own daughter is a stranger to him.
Good. We've been eating more than I thought since we arrived. Once Link's celebration is over, I'll send another group out for meat.
You're assuming the weather will permit it, I remind him. It's quiet for a moment, and I unbraid my hair, letting the blonde waves fall over my shoulders. I might as well call it a night since I'm exhausted anyway, and in no mood for conversation, especially the stilted kind we have over dinner, that only Raph makes tolerable.
Soon, we won't have to worry so much about the storms,
my father says as he turns a page of his notebook. Yes, I'm sure your men are anxious to return home.
Yes,
he says,
and I think you might enjoy life at sea, for the first stretch, at least.
I laugh. No, I don't think that will be happening. Especially after today. I can't imagine being cooped up on a ship with Raph and Issa.
Of course it is,
he says assuredly, not even bothering to look up at me. It occurs to me I don't even know if he's really studying his ledger or simply doing everything he can to not look at me, as usual, and my blood boils. Dropping my hands to my sides, I stare at him, done playing this game. I'm not leaving with you.
Samara, you are foolish if you think staying here is—
What? Better? And what do I get if I leave with you, father? He finally looks at me.
A life far better than the one you have here.
I shake my head. You think I would leave Gil and Link?
Gil is returning with us.
A wave of nausea fills me. He what? Finally, my father closes his book and rises to his feet.
Gil is coming. I'm uncertain about Link.
He says it so matter-of-factly, as if he isn't upturning my world all over again, and I clench my hands into fists. My father opens a trunk and puts his ledger inside.
Stop fighting this, Samara,
he says as if he's tired of humoring me.
Returning with us will be for your own good.
You have no idea what's for my own good.
And staying here with men lurking in the woods who would try to kill you is better than returning with me.
His eyes meet mine, shining with a ferocity I haven't seen in 6 years. I swallow, briefly forgetting that I am not in his charge anymore, and I am not afraid of him. Those men wouldn't even be here if it weren't for you. I counter, more convinced of that by the day.
You don't know that.
My father shakes his head, heaves out a breath, and as he rests his hands on his hips, he forces himself to look at me again.
You still don't trust me?
He asks. I can't help but shake my head at his complete denial. Or is it oblivion? It's not about trust anymore, I tell him.
Then what is it?
He says, sounding wary, which enrages me even more.
This place isn't safe anymore, Samara.
Was it safe the day you left? I sweep my arms out in utter disbelief. Besides, you said you've made the waters safer.
It's not about raiders and ships. It's about this place, the land and the storms. The barn has already burned down once. How much longer before you're struck by lightning? Or this old cottage burns to the ground with you or Gil inside it?
I rub my forehead, exhaling what little patience I have left. I appreciate you wanting to protect me, I say, grinding out the word. But I'm old enough to worry about myself. You don't have to do that anymore.
I will always worry about you, Samara. You're my daughter, even if you wish you weren't.
He busies himself with his empty mug.
How much longer before there are no changing seasons at all? You know it's dangerous. You're being stubborn.
Maybe storms are far less terrifying than living a life trapped with a father who can barely stand me. With a derisive exhale, he looks at me.
What nonsense are you talking about?
This! I shout, waving between us. You can barely bring yourself to look at me.
And how do you want me to feel? He bellows. What do you want from me, Samara? Yes, I left, but I've helped expand an empire for you. Does that count for nothing? What else can I give you?
His chest heaves, and I can't help the grip of desperation overcoming me. You don't get it, I choke out.
You have done so much, but for who? A daughter you avoid at all costs? Why do any of it at all?
He looks away. Why did you really come back? Out of guilt?
I came back for you,
He shouts, throwing his hands up.
I want to give you what I couldn't before. How many times must I say it?
All I have ever wanted is for you to act like you care about me, like you love me at all. You say you've made this grand gesture and returned for me, but you're not really here. We haven't talked or spent time together. I know Raph and Issa better than I know you. All you've done is find reasons to keep busy and bide your time. I don't understand.
Because it's too hard.
He bites out. His eyes cut to me, boring into me with pain and anguish and dejection that turn my stomach as he practically cringes at my scars.
I thought enough time had passed and it would be easier, but your face...
My face, I repeat on a breath. Although I already know it's an issue for him, hearing him say it reopens old, festering wounds. Yeah, I say through the lump in my throat. That's always been the problem, hasn't it?
Yes, I'm sorry, but
I don't need you to be sorry. I need you to be a father. I march for the door, unwilling to break down in front of him. Not when I've cried far too many tears over the man who will never change, no matter how much I wanted to believe he had. He bellows my name as I fling the door open, but I don't turn back. I don't acknowledge Issa staring at me with a basket in her hands, or the villagers whose eyes follow me with curiosity as I run away from his booming voice as fast as I possibly can. Chapter 30. As the sky darkens to dusk, I stare at my reflection in the tide pools. The scars stretch from cheek to chin, white and raised and scoffing at me. I've never hated them so much in my life. Not only did they not keep my father from leaving that horrible, desperate day, they prevent my father from loving me now. Growling, I slap the water and continue toward the lookout on the cliff, desperate to put space between me and everything else that makes my soul tender and restless. From everything that reminds me of the past and the future colliding in such a whirlwind of uncontrollable chaos, I can't seem to catch my breath. I stalk up a deer trail to the watchtower. Its redwood beams are covered in lichen, and wild grasses grow between the sideboards. No one's stationed at it during the storm season because it's unsafe, and here I'm likely to remain alone. But drawing closer, I notice someone sitting inside. A large folded form, a male form. Eric. I freeze, my boots scuffing a rock. He looks over and stiffens.
Samara?
My heart drops from my throat to the pit of my stomach, and I turn to hurry away. Don't worry, I'm leaving. I call over my shoulder.
You don't have to,
he says with an edge of alarm.
Samara, wait.
I stop mid-step. Last I saw Eric, he wanted nothing to do with me, and it's all I can do not to scream. At least my father is predictable. Eric, he's just infuriating. And shaking my head in utter disbelief, I spin to face him as he walks down the steps to me. You know what? I bite out. I liked you more when you were a complete ass all the time. At least your moods were reliable, and you were easier to figure out. I throw my hands up as he stops a few feet away from me. Now, I don't know if you hate me, if you're angry with me about something. Half the time, I don't know if we're friends or enemies. I rake my fingers through my loose hair, grabbing on so tightly it stings, and I feel like I'm losing my mind. What's your problem with me, Eric? My nostrils flare in desperation. He averts his gaze, looking almost sheepish, which is unlike him, and I hold my breath. With an exhale, Eric rubs his head with bruising pressure, his arms taut as if braced for whatever he needs to say, but nothing comes. I point toward the village. I see you with your father, taking care of him, doing all of his work for him. You've taken on so much and have so many reasons to be angry at the world, and yet it's me you hate? My hands drop to my sides with defeat. I get that I have done some shitty things, but it's not like I haven't suffered for it.
I don't hate you.
No? Because I see it clearly in your eyes sometimes when you look at me, and I shake my head. I know I'm some scar-faced, hideous monster to you, and you still blame me for taking my mother's axe that day. But I was a child, Eric. It wasn't intentional. Do you still really hold all of that against me? I hate the crack in my voice and the absolute need I feel to move past the memories and actions that I can never seem to outrun.
No,
He says quietly. Then what is it? My eyes burn and my jaw aches with tension, but I refuse to let the tears form in my eyes. Maybe my father's right, I think aloud and stare out at the crashing waves. At least in leaving with him, I might start over. Maybe I should just go south, because I have nothing left here.
don't.
The word is a command that makes my breath catch in my throat. And when Eric looks at me again, his gaze isn't burning with ire as it scans my face. He looks as miserable as I feel. Don't what? Call you out? Don't go? Don't speak? I'm not made of stone, Eric, in spite of what you might think. My tears fall unbidden. Your anger, it drips from every word, and every time you scowl at me, it feels like,
Please, stop.
he rasps. Then tell me, I beg, squeezing my eyes shut. Please, because I'm so tired. I can't do this anymore. It's a mew, a plea, a frantic whisper, willing the wind to whisk away the scars and dust from over the years along with it.
I try to hate you,
Eric says, and I'm not sure I've ever heard him sound so broken.
because it feels better than the guilt.
My eyes fly open. What? Eric's face isn't etched with hard lines anymore. Instead, his features are bleak and fallen. He looks lost and afraid, like the boy he once was.
Seeing you every day, having to look at your face.
I can't help the tremble of my chin, no matter how much I want to hold my head high and pretend the truth doesn't hurt.
No,
In 2 strides, he's in front of me.
I didn't mean it like that.
The inches between us come alive, and whatever burns in his eyes feels painfully intimate. I gulp, bracing myself for whatever comes next. Eric's hands fist at his sides, and he peers down at them. I've never seen him so anxious.
You are not the monster, Samara. I am.
He says it so reverently, my heart swells to near bursting.
Every day I see you. Every time I look at your face, the guilt burrows deeper.
My hair whips in the wind between us. What? I don't understand. The hard planes of Eric's face are more crestfallen than I ever thought possible.
You were gone. You and your father were in the scorched forest. I thought I was protecting her, both of them. They might still be alive if it weren't for me.
Who? Your mother or Wyatt's? I don't understand what any of this has to do with me, but whatever Eric isn't saying feels like a toxic, suffocating fog I can barely breathe through. What are you talking about, Eric? His eyes meet mine, more turbulent than any storm.
Your mother was with us. She was getting herbs when we heard the horn, but it was too late. The walls were breached and our house was the closest.
Images assault me. My heart thunders against my breast so fast I have to catch my breath.
When the men burst into the cottage, I knew Olivia would save us. But when she reached for her axe, she said your name, realizing she didn't have it.
Guilt twists inside me.
It wasn't until then that I was truly terrified. I thought I was helping,
He says, staring at his palms, as if they drip with regret.
I can still see her blood on my hands sometimes.
Whose blood? I take a step closer. What happened, Eric? When his regret-filled eyes meet mine, I already know what he's going to say.
She was fighting off the men, her and my mother both, and I tried to help. I had my skinning knife, and I brought one of them down, but then
his Adam's apple bobs with a thick swallow.
Your mother was shoved. She fell into my knife.
Eric's form is watery at best, and I bite back a sob as I imagine my mother, fighting for her life, only to fall into Eric's blade, one of ours, and meet her end. It wasn't a raider who killed my mother, but you? The words sound distant to my ears. But her throat, it was slit. I saw it. Then I remember her stomach soaked in crimson as well. And I imagine the raiders didn't care if she was already dying. They needed to ensure it. I'd imagined that day 1,000 times, and never had it played out as vividly as it does now. And my anger and hatred outshine everything else. Hatred toward Eric for never telling me the truth, for making me think she'd fallen at the hands of our enemy, for killing my mother and, in turn, taking my father away from me. But it's every snide remark Eric has made about my face and every scathing look over the past 6 years that strikes the biggest blow, making my hands tremble. And you've tormented me all this time when you're a liar and a murderer. Eric swallows again and dips his chin.
I couldn't save my own mother, and I convinced myself that if you hadn't taken Olivia's axe, I wouldn't have had to try to save any of them at all, and they would all still be alive. I wouldn't feel so much shame. But the guilt, when I look at you, I'm reminded I failed in every single way, and I hate myself for it.
His words are sharp needles of frigid water, crashing over me as I try to reconcile the animosity that's bloomed between us for years.
I know I'm a coward, but you deserve the truth.
I clench my hands to keep them from shaking, but the instant my muscles coil, my body moves of its own bidding. My arm rears back, and my fist collides with Eric's face. He curses and takes a faltering step back. His cheek colors with a red imprint of my fist, but it's relief that shines in his eyes. You got so angry with wrath for hiding something, I seethe, shaking out my fist. And all this time, I take a few staggering steps backward. I want to tell Eric to never look at me or talk to me again. But it's all I can do not to crumble at his feet and sob. I don't know where I'm going as I stalk away, but it's as far as I can get from the regretful look on his face.
All right, that is a wrap on part 2 of Tide and Tempest. That is not the final part. There is one more part to come. Thank you for bearing with me. I hope you're enjoying her story. It was so much fun to write, and I absolutely love her character. She's so strong and broken and tender and all the things, and I'm just so proud of her as a character, and I had so much fun writing her story. So I hope you're enjoying it as well. Be sure to listen to part 1 and 2 before you dive into part 3, and happy listening.